Good morning, everybody. If you're all sitting comfortably, I think we can begin. There's still people filtering in. My name is Joshua Pisana. I am the managing editor of Euractiv, and it is a delight for me and a pleasure to introduce you to the 2026 edition of the Euractiv Agri-Food Policy Conference. We like to see these conferences as an extension of our journalism and a chance and opportunity to transform and transfer the debates we're having on paper and in policy rooms to a public space for debate and conversation. This is a conversation led by our teams that spend their days reporting about this. I don't think you need to talk to Commissioner Hansen here in the audience or to read our daily Harvest newsletter to realize that there's a lot going on in the agri-food space at the moment. And that's reflected in the fact that this conference even was heavily oversubscribed. So congratulations to those that have managed to get a seat, because yes, there are many people probably queuing around the block outside waiting to get in. So for the next few hours, you will be led through a conversation with Commissioner Hansen, which will start in a couple of seconds. There will then be 4 distinct panels led by Alice, Sophia, Angelo again, and Maria, our agri-food team, who spend their days getting scoops, providing analysis, and writing the newsletter. I think many of you receive in your inboxes every morning the must-read agri-food reporting every day, every weekday. And so those will cover everything from trade to the food system and to also the much discussed omnibus packages. So my job, first of all, is to invite Commissioner Christophe Hansen to the stage. Commissioner, if I could welcome you. There you go. I'm not sure which of the seats you're to take, but I'm not sure it matters. And then secondly, our excellent editor, Angelo De Mambro. Wishing you all a wonderful conversation, and see you later.
Thank you. So please, we start. Can you hear me? Yes. We start with the keynote speech of Commissioner Hansen, please.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, I have to say it's a pleasure for me to be here as a commissioner for the second time. Last year, it's a different location, but it is my second participation. And I must say that the topic of today's event is spot on, linking trade, competitiveness and sustainability, because it reflects as well the vision for agriculture and food that I have presented last year in February. The difference I would make, of course, is we need as well a fair trade that works for all sides. And these 3 pillars as well are a prerequisite to our food security. And we live, of course, in times where food security is no longer an abstract concept as well. And history was not only written in treaties and shifting borders, but also in harvests and in hungers. And who controls the grain controls in the end everything. And this is today eventually even more important than it was in the past. And Europe knows this lesson well. It is not by chance that the common agricultural policy is the longest common policy in the European project, because after World War II, hunger was nothing that we didn't know on the European continent, and I think it was very important that this has been put up. And our good old CAP has, of course, evolved over time to adapt to changing societal needs and also a more market orientation, and it has been a success. And today we are, of course, privileged to have enough food and to be largely self-sufficient. The EU is also the world's biggest exporter of food. We are in 2024, we exported 235 billion in value in agri-food goods, which was 64 billion more than we imported. So as well, our agri-food sector heavily depends on these exports. But in our very volatile world, nothing can be taken for granted. And one thing is very clear, speaking about food security today in Europe is neither alarmist nor irresponsible. And the Draghi report's analysis on Europe's competitiveness sent us a very clear message there. Europe must become more productive if it wants to remain both prosperous and avoid trade-offs between leadership, climate ambition, and our ability to act independently on the world stage. But in this context, agriculture is not a sector where Europe is falling behind. It is one where Europe is already ahead. And Europe is a global agri-food power. EU farmers and food producers deliver high quality and safe food and at an affordable price. And we are not starting from a weakness, we are starting from a strength, and now we need to keep it that way. And because we have sometimes, let's say, the reflex when we are strong in a certain sector to say, okay, this is going to be forever like that. No, it's something we need to maintain permanently as well. And we face very severe pressing challenges now. Climate change, I recently visited Portugal and Andalusia after the floods and the storms they have lived, and I can tell you food security is not something we have to take for granted. Farmers are even doubting to reconstruct everything because they don't have the necessary security, and they have lost already several times their entire harvest and machineries. And we face, of course, as well geopolitical tensions. We have shifting consumer demands, so we must ask ourselves which direction do we take to reinforce our leadership that we currently still have. And today I call as well for the preservation of our solid farming and food foundations, not out of some misplaced sense of nostalgia, but because strength of our continent depends on it. And these foundations are the basis of everything else, of a competitive economy, flourishing societies, and attractive surroundings and sustainability. And this is what my travels through rural Europe made crystal clear. Since my arrival, I have listened and engaged and took as well already actions. And since the last time I addressed this assembly, I have visited all of the 27 member states at least once, engaging directly with farmers, the local authorities, and the rural communities. And for me, it was very important not only to go to the capitals and eventually see the representatives that I anyhow will meet here in Brussels, but to go as well to the countryside, to go to the farmers that are not or do not have the time maybe to engage directly. So it's important to go there. And this is, of course, very important. And I want to share with you some messages that I got from some of these farmers. And rather than to have a long expose around European agriculture model in 2026, I will share you 3 stories of 3 different farms across that I visited. And 3 farms, 3 regions, 3 realities, but together I also have seen one common European story. And let me first take you to Ireland, to County Kildare, to a family dairy farm investing, adapting, and preparing for the next generation. And like so many farmers across Europe, their message was very simple. Give us clarity, give us coherence, and give us room to farm. And I think that is something that really is something we have forgotten over the last years and maybe decades, to give this clarity, coherence, and room to farm back to the entrepreneur, because farmers are entrepreneurs. And this is why, when answering the question of competitiveness, my first reaction will be cut red tape and unnecessary obligations. And that is something we have already delivered on the CAP with an omnibus on the common agriculture policy. But also I heard a lot the farmers complaining not about the CAP, but rather about other European, national, or sometimes regional obligations. And I think everybody needs to contribute to give this time to farm back to the farming communities. And farmers should spend, as I say, their time producing food and not managing an overload of paperwork. But this principle, we have to put it into practice. So on my simplification package, we have estimated that this represents 1.6 billion annually for farmers, less red tape, less administrative burden, so they spend less money and have more time for their wheel work, let's say, and also 210 million for the national administrations. But even more importantly, it tailors our measures to the realities on the ground, because real simplification means that means policies that work not only on paper but also outside on the pasture. And ladies and gentlemen, competitiveness also means a fair income, and there will be no farmers in 2040 without economic viability. And that is why we have strengthened the Common Market Organization, and we are preparing the review of the Unfair Trading Practices Directive. We are also working on more transparent markets with the Agri-Food Chain Observatory, and we are setting up an expert group on access to farmland, because farmers and small producers must have a fairer position in the food chain. And now let me take you to Pumpuri farm in Latvia, a farm that came back to life through CAP-backed investment and local cooperation. And that story matters, but it matters even more because of where it is. It is in the border region between Latvia and Russia. And in these eastern regions of our union, agriculture is not only about production, it is also about EU territorial resilience and strategic presence. So strong rural regions are our best line of defense, and they want us to commit to this strategic challenge. And in Lithuania, I visited the Kinderio farm, not far from Belarus, and this is an organic farm, and Europe must commit to an agriculture model that protects both our environment and our capacity to produce, because if soils, water, or natural resources fail us, we lose our competitiveness, and sustainable agriculture practices are not a nice to have, but a must have. And the European organic model is part of that commitment. And the ongoing review of the organic framework aims to ensure it continues to deliver environmental value while remaining economically viable for our farmers. And at the same time, farms like Pumpuri and Kinderio show that sustainability today is not only environmental. It is also about resilience, food security, and strategic autonomy. And in 2026, we will move forward with a livestock strategy, a protein plan, and stronger risk management tools, and because these are strategic choices. And I mentioned now the example as well from Portugal, farmers, adult men crying because they have lost for the second time their entire physical installation, and they are doubting to go back. And I asked them, do you have an insurance? No, we don't have an insurance because there is no company giving them an insurance. And without that, the risk is simply sometimes too high. And so these tools need to be strengthened. And that is why we are working as well very intensively with the European Investment Bank to find solutions for reinsurance so that the insurance companies can offer products to the farmers to protect their production. And so I believe that farmers must know and trust Europe stands by them in such difficult times, and that we are caring about them. And this is why we are strengthening the tools to allow member states to support farmers after such natural disasters, provide crisis payments, and boost, as I said, our insurance and reinsurance tools to restore the agriculture production capacity. And CARE is also showing appreciation for their work and being proud of our food and drink heritage. And pride is more than a feeling. Our geographical indication system generates around 75 billion in value, with prices on average more than twice of those with non-GI products. And this is economic value built on origin, on authenticity, and trust. And in 2026, we will therefore deploy a record budget for EU promotion policy. And I will lead high-level missions, business missions with producers to open new opportunities in the global markets. I had already 2 of them last year, one to Japan, one to Brazil. I see some of the participants to these missions because they have strong opportunities there and making good contracts. So this is something we need to build on. And we will also launch a campaign to invite all Europeans to be proud of their food and drinks products and to buy more European, because in the internal market there is a lot of untapped potential that we need to raise, because I believe as well that European consumers will have a European preference if they really see what is the European product. And to conclude, let's zoom out and take a snapshot of the world around us. These are of course very testing times, and you are well aware that the current escalation in Iran and in the Middle East has an impact on energy prices, and we are far from the shock experienced in 2022 when Russia brutally invaded Ukraine. But who knows how long this conflict will last. Prices are rising. We have, of course, let's say, a little bit of resilience, but this resilience has as well its limits. And I follow the markets very closely, and I will be very vigilant that the burden of these extra costs do not fall only on farmers and primary producers. This will be unacceptable and just push them out of the market. And in this regard, I know that EU action is expected regarding fertilizers, and having access to sufficient and affordable fertilizers is key for our food security. And this is clearly one of our vulnerabilities currently, and we will hold an industry and farmers dialogue on fertilizers shortly, bringing together farmers and the European industries that manufacture fertilizers around the same table. And in spring, I also will present a fertilizer action plan to address the structural vulnerabilities and market imbalances, boost our domestic production, including circular, bio-based and low-carbon fertilizers, and to diversify our supply chains. And this has, of course, already been launched before the Middle East crisis, but it is even more relevant now in these new circumstances. And ladies and gentlemen, I described to you 3 realities, but also 1 Europe. And clarity, commitment, and care, that is what farmers ask of us and from the Common Agriculture Policy, for them to be able to build a viable business case, to contribute to our competitiveness, and to be part of Europe's strategic autonomy. And with this direction, Europe will not only preserve its agricultural strength, we will renew it. And because European agriculture is not a nostalgic concern, it is central to our shared future. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I don't know how much time we have. I will start from the final part of your speech, fertilizers strategy or fertilizers dialogue and so on. Okay, but in 2022, the European Commission proposed something very similar, and the shock there was stronger than now. What can you do more than 2022?
Well, of course, I think there is no silver bullet in this solution, because we are heavily dependent, first of all, of fertilizer imports. This is for a reason, because energy is cheaper elsewhere in the world. We have very high prices for energy in the European Union. We have as well emission prices, and I think we have to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathing water, because we have still industry in the European Union that is viable, but nonetheless we have to be careful. They have invested heavily in as well technologies to reduce their emissions, and I think that is something we shouldn't put at risk. I believe we have to look into different means, for example, as well ETS revenues. we have as well to look into CBAM revenues in order to help the sector, but the industry sector, but as well the farming sector. I also believe that we have to look into regulatory barriers currently, for example, for the circular reuse of organic fertilizers that our farmers have. We had an implementation dialogue on the 18th of February, I think it was, with my colleague Jessica Roswell, with the sector, and one example came back very often. Farmers that have manure on their farm need to pay to get rid of part of their manure, and at the same time they have to buy fossil-based fertilizers again on the farm. This is economically nonsense, and it is as well environmentally nonsense in the end. And therefore, I think we need to look into these barriers. What is currently preventing us? This might as well be on opening certain legislation. I think that would be very important. And then, of course, we have as well to look into what is homegrown of fertilizers in the end. And this is one part, the organic, but we have as well the bacteria-based fertilizers that are, for example, enriching. This is still in the baby shoes, but I think that is something where we could be the front runner, reduce heavily our dependence on imports. This is nitrogen fixing bacteria, for example. The technology is still young, but I think there are a lot of examples where we could be independent, not dependent on fossil energy, and be the front runner again. So I think there are several of these initiatives, but we are still, of course, looking with the sectors into what possibilities they see. This would be low emission fertilizers. I think that is something we need to look as well into when it comes to the sustainability that we want to give to our farming and food sector.
You also mentioned the livestock strategy. The call for evidence was launched last Friday, I think, but also a protein strategy. So how will the two strategies complement each other? I mean, it's connected. The two strategies will be connected, I think. How they will be connected?
Well, of course, we have a general concern when we look into the figures of livestock in the European Union. And when I prepared for my hearing, I was looking into these figures. They had gone down in the last 10 years by 7.8% all over Europe. You have certain regions in the European Union where it is worse. Cyprus, I think it went down by 57%, here in Belgium by 14%. And this at the moment where the meat prices for beef, for example, are at a record high. And then you ask yourselves, why are farmers stopping even though they have now eventually an economic interest? It is because it is a very tough job. It is because in many regions we have constraints, natural constraints, water problems, etc. And as well, often when a farmer stops because there is no generational renewal, the next one taking over, and it was a livestock farm, it is very rare nowadays that the successor will continue with livestock because it is a high risk. There comes as well the problem with animal diseases, and I have to say it's not directly my portfolio, but nonetheless it's my constituents who are concerned by it. This has a huge potential to put at risk our food security. It has a huge potential to make agriculture in many regions of the European Union irrelevant. Look at mountain regions. What can you do else than livestock? What can you do in some border regions of the European Union without livestock? I think that is something that we need to take very seriously. Now, on the protein side, we have, of course, the heavy dependence on imports for proteins, because I was speaking earlier on our trade balance. From a monetary point of view, we are a net exporter. When you look at proteins or calories, we are a net importer. So that again underlines that food security is not something we should take for given. We are for the future CAP. We have proposed to strengthen the possibility for coupled support. which is something that we can actively use. We need as well to see the economic possibilities, create value chains. I think that is very important as well. And you see that some farmers want to switch, for example, to produce lentils because it is something, a sustainable crop, and it is, has a high value. But often the value chains after that do not exist, and this is very burdensome as well for them to do them up. So I think there comes as well the Common Market Organization, where we have strengthened as well the producer organizations with the transforming part, and there we see a lot of potential as well in the future MFF, in the NRPP, but as well in the competitiveness fund.
Sorry, but in the end, you said let's increase couple support for protein crops, but in the end, the choice is up to member states. They can make the choice for other sectors, such as, for instance, livestock sector. So this is a big trade-off. It is a big choice to make. It
is a big choice to make. But again, as I said, I went to the 27 member states, and there is no reality that you can say, okay, this percentage everybody needs to do. It is, of course, in some regions, it will be more important to support the livestock. Let's say in France, in the Massif Central, where you cannot do much else, or in other regions in the European Union, well, it's more relevant to produce, to support the livestock sector in order to remain in that area. In other regions, it should be important to maybe we have had this year very low prices on wheat and cereals, for example, that we encourage the farmers with coupled support as well to move into the protein crops because the value is higher and they have an additional incentive. And I think this is something where I see a lot of potential. There is no one size fits all, and I think that is as well the beauty of the future CAP, that we can really have a tailor-made approach with at the same time maintaining the high standards and ambitions when it comes to environmental, climate protection and so on.
You always talk about cutting red tape because this is one of the distinctive characters of this commission and of your mandate. But then in the debate I hear talking about strategic reserves that cost money and are cost bureaucracy for member states. I hear more border controls, and that's the same. I hear also about expanding origin labeling, that it's good, but in the end, in some member states, it can be where you have raw materials going from one member state to another in different parts of the processing. This is quite burdensome for companies. So this is quite provocative, but are we replacing one kind of bureaucracy with another?
I don't believe that we are replacing one kind of bureaucracy with another, because when you look at the future CAP, it is going to be way more simple. Just an example, we have currently the conditionality and the GAICs for the first pillar. This has caused major problems, and that is why, again, when you go to Sweden and to Cyprus in the same week, you will see that erosion protection measures will not be the same from one region to another. And this flexibility, I think, is something where we reduce. Another example, we have currently, for example, eco schemes in the first pillar, and we have agro-environmental measures in the second pillar. And for administrations, often this is they have to invent two different programs, often serving the same purpose. The farmer needs to do two measures on the farm, but as well fill in two different papers. So I think there is a lot of streamlining in. We have as well the principle of once communicated, several times used. This will poses a problem to certain member states because they believe or they are fighting between different administrations, but for a farmer, it shouldn't be relevant to whom he communicates, and that is why we insisted as well to be part of the digital wallet. for farmers, so they put their information in and the administrations can take it from there, so this reduces a lot. And then of course when you speak about more controls on the borders when it comes to our food products coming in, I think that is something the farming sector asks for, more reciprocity, and we can of course rely on paper exchanges on administrative level, but I think the farmers want and need to know that the product coming in is complying with the same standards, and I think that is important. You mentioned labeling. Yes, that can be a little bit more tricky, but again, and I said it earlier as well, when you have, my kids love chicken nuggets, for example, but when you look at the chicken nuggets, do you know where the meat is coming from?
No.
When you buy the entire chicken, yes, there you can see it. But
I became an expert of reading labeling of...
well, I always did that even before I became commissioner, but I think it's important, and I'm as well I have a European preference. I will not go so far to say I only eat Luxembourgish, because then my diet would not be very balanced, I would say. But we have amazing products all over Europe, and I am convinced that our standards are the strongest in the world. And I believe that a lot of consumers think the same way, and this is exactly when we want to go into buy European, it needs as well to be visible, especially on sensitive products like poultry, and I believe that many consumers will have this preference.
So the last question, because also to launch the following panel that will be on trade, because I received some reactions when you went to Munich, to the security conference on Munich. You spoke about the different approach to food security, not only a social and development issue, but a strategic asset. A speech that was leaning towards, from security towards sovereignty. And sovereignty is a bit ambiguous, always ambiguous. So the reaction I was having, it was, do you think this means more protectionism? This concept of security, of food security, is bringing us to protectionism? This is a question.
No, I don't believe this brings us to protectionism. But what is very clear, and this is a tendency probably human society always has, it wants to go into the cheapest possible way to produce. And this has led us, let's say, just our dependency on Russian gas. That was the cheapest opportunity to decarbonize our economy, and the problem is far away, let's say. And this is as well with the common agriculture policy, because people sometimes say it is too expensive, we are spending too much money on the common agriculture policy. And I say it's not the money we are spending that is too much, it would be the absence of a CAP budget that would be way more expensive in the long term. Because if we are depending on market volatilities, this is something maybe some countries in Africa still face today, that they are heavily dependent on that. That is something we cannot afford, and we shouldn't be affording. We have, of course, as well to be, because if you are dependent on imports, and without CAP, we would not be self-sufficient, not even in value. I think that is something we need to get back to our minds, that this is one of our biggest strengths that we currently have, that whatever works in the world, it might be difficult years if we are dependent on fertilizers, but again, also on fertilizers, we need to become more self-sufficient, less dependent on third countries, less dependent on eventual crisis out in the world. And I think this is just a strategic thinking that we sometimes lose out of sight because it's the simplest and the cheapest way. Defense would be another example. We have neglected defense over decades because we felt secure. We were a little bit naive.
I think we should start from a basic point that there is a legitimate expectation that sustainability objectives are dealt with also by EU legislation, and this is exactly what has been done with deforestation and CBAM. There is a sufficient evidence that these objectives are a shared concern around the world, and starting from these, the question is how to make sure that these objectives are achieved in a way which is the least trade distorting possible. And I think we have good examples through the deforestation, CBAM, but also elsewhere in other fields of the EU legislation, that it is possible to have a shared objective of competitiveness plus sustainability at the same time in a way which doesn't distort trade and brings on board those partners like Brazil who are actually committed to the sustainability objectives and have a shared objective of achieving these goals together. I think the Mercosur agreement is precisely a good example of that. It contains a sustainability development chapter which has been developed. It has been subject to discussions and improvement over time. And I think with the collaboration of the Mercosur partners, this has ultimately landed in something which is really optimal in terms of making sure that trade and sustainability can go hand in hand, and this shared objective is really achieved by all partners. So there is a possibility that trade and sustainability can coexist in a way which doesn't alienate trade partners and make them on board in the achieving this shared objective of improving environmental and climate around the world.
Well, but it has led to tensions in some issues, because it's not always, as you said, Brazil has carried out efforts to protect their biomes, their ecosystems, and perhaps they're not totally aligned with how the EU perceives that global South countries should conduct those efforts. What do you think about that? About that sometimes difficulty in aligning our vision for sustainability and the vision that your country already has?
I think one way of looking at this is sometimes the EU's regulations, be it on sustainability, be on other very important topics of the day, such as, for example, the digital economy, they can be models to other countries, such as Brazil. We use the European model of, for example, the AI regulation on digital economy, etc., to do our own legislation. The problem starts when the EU adopts legislations with a declared sustainability objective, but that creates a series of problems to trade, and it is a bit intrusive in our domestic policies. And that's when we need more dialogue, we need more cooperation. So the Commissioner mentioned, and my colleague mentioned, the UDR, CBAM. We do not necessarily like those pieces of legislation, but they are there, they exist. So what we ask the EU, our colleagues from the Commission and other actors here, is that we have more dialogue, more cooperation, and that you take into consideration reality on the ground, how production occurs, differences in different countries, and how to best make sure that these legislations do not have the unintended effects of creating problems to trade. So this would be my first reaction to your question.
And just the US, who said that UDR could create problems to exports of protein. And we also just heard that we are highly dependent on protein imports. Does the Commission think that this kind of legislation can pose an unintended effect, or at the end is just an exaggeration of the consequences?
These regulations actually are very ambitious. There is no doubt. And they do have an effect on trade. This is equally clear. And it's equally clear that there is a number of trade partners who are concerned, amongst which the US is not the only one. But I think if you look at the history of the last 5 years, both in the design of the regulation, in its practical decision-making process, in the way these regulations have been communicated to third countries, in the way the mitigating measures that these third countries, but not only third countries, proposed have been integrated into the regulations, have been, this is all clear example that these trade impact have already been factored in the regulation. Now, we start from a basic point, which is the legitimate expectation that environmental and climate objectives, shared concerns across the world should be achieved. This is a starting point. The fact is how to minimize the impact on trade, and I think the history of the last 5 years shows that, for example, by ensuring longer transitional period, postponement of the regulation to make sure that not only internal operators in the EU, but also exporters to the EU get used actually to the practical elements of this implementation, through not only through time, but also taking into consideration the legislation and the practical enforcement of the legislation in third countries. There are possibilities enshrined, for example, in the different regulations to make sure that what has been done, the efforts that have been done elsewhere in the third countries are taken into account, for example, in the case of the deforestation regulation under the risk classification categories of the third countries. So there are elements and mitigating measures, and I can go on and on. For example, in the case of African countries or least developed countries, the need to adapt and support the governance that would have to change in order to comply with these requirements, technical assistance, the mobilization of funds in favor also of the least developed economies in order to make sure, through, for example, the gateway, there is a number of efforts that the EU has made in order to mitigate the effects on trade and take into account these legitimate concerns that third countries have. So I think that by doing this, and if you look at what has been done building on these mitigating measures in the last 5 years, one can really come to the conclusion that these effects on trade have been minimized and the concerns of third countries have been taken into account. Of course, the question is still open out there, and then we see the US complaining, etc. But we think that indeed there is lots of these concerns have been addressed through the last in the last years.
Thank you. And let's go to Mercosur, because we're at a crucial time after the European Commission President announced that the Commission would move forward with provisional application, and we got the first notifications from Mercosur countries. I think it was Argentina, Brazil ratified, Uruguay ratified, Argentina ratified. So a crucial time after writing many headlines about how Mercosur is finally gonna kick in. I'm gonna ask Ignacio about opening the markets, because of course the wine sector has always been very vocal in favor of Mercosur, but opening goes both ways. How does the wine sector feel about imports of wines from, let's say, Argentina?
Thank you, Sofia. I think for the wine sector we are very open. We are not protectionist. We are not afraid of competition. We are proud of our wines. We have the chance that wines are not a normal commodity. People is not buying wine just because of the price. I mean, there is a storytelling behind. So we are not afraid of Argentinian wines coming. And in the other hand, if those saying that Europe will be flooded by Argentinian wines, today there is no barrier for Argentinian wines. An Argentinian wine, a red wine, will be paying 13 cents per bottle, per liter, as entry tariff, and the rest is once you enter in the European Union, you are free to move. There is no complex procedure to move your wines around the world, so around the European Union. So we are not afraid of it. And if European consumer thinks that from time to time they want to enjoy a sparkling wine from Brazil, Tanat from Uruguay, etc., good, because it's about the wine community. And I think we were discussing before with the colleague, with Glauco. The arrival of European wine to Brazil is not about kicking out Brazilian bottles out of the market to put our bottles. It's about increasing the wine community. Today, Brazilians are drinking 2.2 liters of wine per capita, so the same time Gabon. So I think there is an opportunity to increase the quantity of wine and the quality of wine that they are drinking and offer them. So we are not afraid of wines coming here.
And sometimes in the debate in the Brussels bubble on Mercosur, we speak about the sensitive sectors in the EU agriculture, but I assume there are also sensitive sectors in Brazil that you have to convince about the Mercosur agreement, right?
You are completely right. Wine was one of them. Dairy was another. There were a series in the agricultural part of the discussions. I would say those were the two most vocal ones, that they had a picture of me where they would throw darts at. But you have other sectors, and the small farmers, the ones that produce honey, the ones that produce like jams. There are a series of sectors. You had the geographical indications discussion, which was a very complicated discussion, because what sometimes people forget is that we had a lot of European immigration, Spanish, Portuguese, German, Italian, and all these people, they produce, for example, wine, or they produce the same types of dairy products, cheese that you have here. So now they are going to have to give up some of the brands, some of the expressions, and that's going to have an economic cost. So that is another concession that we had to make, which was very politically sensitive. So the short answer is yes, and sometimes people here forget that these concessions from our agricultural sector are going to benefit the European producers. So there is an opportunity there that goes way beyond wine and sparkling wine that I think that people are going to discover.
And I think this was a smooth transition to talk about GIs. I assume, Ignacio, you're pleased with the outcome of recent trade agreements in terms of GI protection. Do you see GIs still as a valid tool to defend European origins and traditional products?
GIs are the cornerstone of the success of European wines around the world. More than 63% of our wines are produced under GI, and when it comes to the exports, the value is over 90%. 90% of the value of the wines that we export from the European Union are under a quality scheme. Again, wine is not a normal commodity. We cannot depend on branding. 99% of our companies are SMEs, so we are not, without mentioning them, in the Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola world where you have two brands that dominate the world. So we need to have this common identity, and GI, it's a good vehicle because it's a common identity plus a common standard of quality and style. So yes, it's fundamental that all the success of the champagne name and the champagne quality is not taken by others. I came from Spain, so Spain was not until the 80s part of the European Union or Community Européenne at the time. And I was born in a country where every time there were some bubbles in a wine, we call it champagne. And if it was a distillate, it was a cognac. And we entered in the European Union and said, oh, we need to change that. I mean, we are not authorized to do it anymore. And we created in Spain, the GI Cava. So now Cava, it's associated with any sparkling wine from the European, from Spain. And it helped Spanish to create an identity for the wine. So GI is good. It was good to protect champagne, but also it was good for the Spanish sparkling wine community or sellers or companies to develop their own identity. So it is good for, it's a gift to the world.
But it seems that GIs are yet again another thing that are being put under, consideration by some trading partners who are signing trade agreements with some of our partners, threatening our GI protections. How does the European Commission respond to this approach, but also to the criticism that some trading partners have of the GI system?
The second question is probably easier. How do we respond to the criticism? And the first question is what we do in practice to push back attempts by others to stop our efforts to recognize GI. So the first question is, what do we do? Actually, I think in all negotiations, actually, we have this chapter on GI recognition. It's an intellectual property chapter, so we shouldn't forget that beyond the quality elements that Ignacio was referring to, there is an intellectual property dimension into it, which is the protection of the right to use the name, which is no different from any other discussion about trademarks. So the right of those producing that product with that name to defend the name and against the free riding of the name for market reasons. But then there is, of course, the question of those who, in good faith, use these. An ambassador mentioned, for example, immigrants or generations of immigrants from Europe who have been using the names in good faith because they're producing the cheese the same way their Italian ancestors would say. So we have to take into consideration that these good faith uses have been there for a while, and there are mechanisms in the agreements we reach with third countries to have a recognition of this good faith practice through elements of coexistence, for example, which at the same time allows the use of the original name from the producers in Europe together with those names which have been used for a long time and which can be grandfathered in the negotiations. Now, the question of what the EU is doing, I know that to face off the attempt of other countries to stop the recognition, both in the agreements that we have already concluded and the agreements we are negotiating, is very simple. We are talking for the agreements which we have not negotiated yet. We are talking to these countries and we're telling them actually that there is a good rationale behind the protection of these GIs and trying to conclude this agreement as soon as possible. And for the agreements which we have already concluded, then the easiest solution to that is have a ratification as soon as possible. To those, I've heard many times, yeah, but what are you doing? Actually, the easiest solution would be to have for example, the Mercosur agreement ratified as soon as possible. That would allow recognition of these GIs within the law of the different countries in Mercosur. And it would give a first advantage to the users, the European users of these GI names in the territories of the Mercosur countries, which means protection before the tribunals and before the judges under the national law in Brazil, Argentina, etc., before actually any other agreement that these countries have done with, for example, the US, can actually enter into force. So it's a kind of race, but that's in a pragmatic way the best way actually to guarantee that there is no overlapping or contradiction between our agreements and what these countries have. Of course, ideally, I mean, once you have negotiated an agreement with a third country, you would expect that there is no contradiction or legal contradiction. That's in the first place. But if this is done, then the obvious solution would be go there, have this agreement concluded, and have this recognition transposed into national law so that they have an advantage.
Yeah, unfortunately, the world is becoming increasingly unpredictable, even for GIs, I think. I have a question from the audience. Actually, didn't say, but you can use Slido, of course, to ask your questions. I have a question on PDO PGI products that maybe the European Commission can answer. What is the policy for including PDO PGI products that are not currently protected under the Mercosur agreement? So I assume they mean new PGIs. Can they be incorporated into trade agreements already negotiated? Is that a question for me too? Like, I don't know. Yes,
I think there is a close review, right? I see the ambassador nodding. So that there is a closer review which allows in the future to have an update of this list. So it doesn't preclude the possibility to add or change GIs.
Mm-hmm. So you can renegotiate from both sides, the GIs, also from the Brazilian side.
I wouldn't say it's a renegotiation. I would say that the agreement is a living instrument. It can be reviewed, it can be improved. That's one of the benefits. So if something is not working, you can discuss and add other things. So that would be the idea.
When I spoke to the ambassador recently, we had an interview. You mentioned disinformation a couple of times regarding Mercosur. There's a big debate in the European Union about food safety now. The food safety omnibus, pesticide authorizations, but also, as Angelo mentioned, reinforcing border controls. So I would like to ask the ambassador on his thoughts about these announcements on reinforcements, if he thinks that they are directed at Mercosur countries, like implying that your products are not safe enough, and also to Ignacio, maybe what does he think about the difference in standards of wine growers in Argentina compared to France?
So, thank you for the opportunity. Yes. First thing I think we need to make very clear, we have no problems with the regulations, the controls of the European Union. We have always met them and we will continue to meet them. And the agreement doesn't change anything. It's a pity that that chair is empty and Madame Aubry is not here. I was looking forward to the conversation. Because there's this idea that on the day the agreement comes into force, you will have some sort of zombie apocalypse in which all these products that don't comply with European legislation are going to come in and poison children and the elderly and etc. This is all fiction and bad quality fiction at it, because we already sell to you every day all these products, and we only sell to you these products if we comply with your regulation. When there's something that is not complying, the market is closed for us. So I have no, I don't think anybody has a problem with the increase of controls. It is your right, sovereign right, to impose your regulations and impose all the controls you want. Now, if you are committed to multilateral rules, like I hear every day here that you are committed, then you have to look at the WTO agreements and what is reasonable in terms of SPS and TBT regulations, what we all agreed that you need. They have to be reasonable, they have to have an objective, and you can't, create regulations that do not make sense. And this applies to SPS, to TBT, but it also applies to sustainability. Because on the issue of the EUDR, I am convinced that almost all of the Brazilian exporters will comply. The problem is the bureaucracy, the problem is the increased cost, and the problem is when you create this idea that all your trading partners are guilty and they have to prove that they are innocent. It would be much easier if you create positive incentives. Sorry for speaking so long, but like in volleyball, you raised the ball and I had the opportunity to make a spectacular move there. But the important message here is the EU can impose all the controls and all the regulations. If they are reasonable, we are ready to comply with them.
I think I do also regret that we don't have MEP Aubry here, but I'm sure she will ask Ignacio if he's not concerned about double standards, about pesticides that are perhaps banned in some countries like France that has very strict pesticide regulations, and that not being a competitive disadvantage for EU wine growers.
Yeah, I think taking it a bit what Ambassador Pedro had said, controls, we don't have a problem with controls, but we have been complaining in the wine sector about the controls made in Brazil. Brazil is Brazilian border controls are a masterclass of a lot of administrative cost for companies. I mean, we have to send a lot of papers. There is a huge control in Brazil, and I was with Commissioner some months ago, and they were explaining to us, they said, look, in Brazil, we like to control, we want the paper. But sometimes we don't trust the paper, so we double check the paper after under controls and the labs test. So we are complaining about the controls, and we are going to impose the same level of controls. And nobody has a problem from a certification point of view. It's just the cost it will create, and the red tape for the administration, because you need to put in place all of this, and the cost for the consumer and for the importer and the producer. And a free trade agreement, it's about a partnership. I mean, we are facing today two kinds of mentalities in the world. Those who negotiate a partnership and those who impose a trade deal, if I can use the term deal, okay? And I think the EU-Mercosur, it's a partnership. And we cannot, returning a little bit to your first question, it is not about imposing everything we want because we don't trust the partners. We can have equivalencies. In the wine sector, and maybe because we are only the four of us, I will tell you a secret that nobody will listen. The European Union rules for the production of wine, they are not 100% aligned with the OIV standard. The OIV is the International Organization of Wine and Wine. We are not 100%. Some of the practice in the European Union, authorized in the European Union, they are not authorized at the international level because there was not an agreement. So if we say only my rules count because I'm the defendant of the truth of the wine, we may have a problem because our rules are not aligned with the Argentinian rules for the production of wine or the American rules for the production of wine. So we need to be careful. And the partners recognize that because of the specificities of certain regions in Europe, they agreed on certain ecological practices. So it's not about imposing, it's about a partnership and understanding how the other is producing, why they are producing like this, and accepting what is acceptable. Because it shall be a partnership.
That's very interesting. Of course, finger pointing is never recommending when it comes to trade matters, because everyone, has their flaws. But going back to the European Commission and the Mercosur agreement, something quite unprecedented took place. That is, the safeguards were detailed in a separate legislation. This is, I think this is the first time it happened for an FTA, even though the safeguard, of course, is contained in the text of the agreement. In the case of the EU, it was detailed to provide better protection for agricultural sectors that the EU deems sensitive. Flavia, I would like to ask, do you think these safeguards strike the right balance? I understand for DigiTrade, it might be not easy to work on this very detailed safeguards, particularly because it became even tighter after negotiations between Council and Parliament.
Yes, with the safeguards, indeed, is an aspect of the Mercosur agreement. Now, let me say a step back before the safeguard, the fact that we're talking about a number of products which are called sensitive products in the EU, which have been treated in a very special way, which have been not subject to full liberalization. What does it mean? That they have been subject to a small amount of volumes for imports. I think one has to remind that, because it's not as if we are liberalizing and we are importing, we'll be flooded by hundreds and hundreds of millions of tons of poultry, beef, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about a very limited percentage, often between 1 and 1.5% of domestic consumption, which is represented by these tariff rate quotas. So that in itself is a guarantee that the imports will not affect the market. Or if there is an effect on the market, this has been proved by several studies, all consistent on this point, the effect would be minimal. So that's the starting point. Now, there has been a debate about whether or not, on top of that, something else was needed. And this something else already existed, which was a special safeguard. It's a safeguard which applies in case of surge of imports, an effect on the market, which creates a serious injury for a part of a sector, and these in cases where, again, these imports would create a problem in the internal market, which for us as a Commission was not the case, because these products were limited in volumes in the first place. So that was the second step. The third step was that eventually in the negotiation it was agreed that this safeguard would be extended also to the products which are subject to TRQs, which was not usually the case in previous negotiation. And then there was a third step, which was internal, domestic within the EU, which is how to operationalize this safeguard in terms of, for example, when would an investigation be triggered? And there is an internal legislation in the EU. It's a legislation which has been adopted, it's been adopted by the Council and the Parliament, has been adopted, which foresees, for example, that the Commission would start an investigation if a certain percentage, 5% of the price, is below the price of the EU, and if imports increase by more than 5% for that specific product, then there is a prima facie evidence that there could be a problem, and then the Commission triggers an investigation. So that's an additional safeguard. All these are safeguards which actually have been added over time and which we do not think will ever be triggered, or if they are triggered, they will be actually of no use, because the most important element is the fact that the quantities have been limited in volumes, and the effect consistently proven by several studies, shows that there won't be a major problem on the EU market. So that is important to highlight, because often we hear that a Mercosur agreement will create huge problems in terms of collapsing the market, etc. This is not true. Evidence of that was, if you go back to the CETA negotiations, when people were shouting because the opening of a TRQ for beef would create such a huge problem to the beef market. The reality is that we are net exporters of beef to Canada, and Canada is hardly exporting any beef to us because they do not comply with our SPS requirements.
But the EU is now concluding more trade agreements with trade partners that are, well, exporters of beef and sheep. I refer to Australia. Do you consider that the Mercosur safeguard style could be a precedent for other trade agreements like Australia, in which beef is also a sensitive sector for the EU farmers?
One should not start from the principle that what you do in a negotiation should necessarily replicate it in other negotiations. So that's the basic principle. Each negotiation has its own logic, its own specific interests on the exporting side, on our side. It doesn't mean that the product that is sensitive in one situation is necessarily sensitive in another one. There is a number of products which are fairly common in terms of sensitive products in all negotiations, but if you negotiate, for example, with Malaysia, you're fairly relaxed about the fact that we are basically exporting products to Malaysia. We will be exporting products to Malaysia rather than the other way around. Of course, something different is the discussion with Australia, which is currently ongoing, which is at a stage which is well advanced. Your question about the safeguard, as I said, it doesn't necessarily mean the fact that you have had a safeguard, this type of safeguard for Mercosur, doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't necessarily have to replicate it for Australia. But the discussions are ongoing, and we will see where it lands.
Yes, of course.
He gave a very complete answer, but there are two pieces of information that I think are important. One is that the quotas that the EU gave Mercosur and the quotas that Mercosur gave the EU, they are staged. So the quantity, the total quantity will only kick in after a series of years, 4 years, 10 years. It won't all come into effect at the beginning. And the second, he made a very important point, this safeguard regulation. We understand that this was born out of a political necessity. So I won't comment further, but it is an important piece of information to know, since the commissioner talked about the cap and about subsidies, and this is where, when you talk about reciprocity, it's a complicated issue because we do not have that kind of subsidies, that the most heavily subsidized products in the EU side are exactly those that are already subject to quotas. So basically what you have is you have a wall, then you build a moat, then you put crocodiles and piranhas in there, and you wait to see if there's going to be competition. So there is a limit, and what we expect, like he said, is that if these safeguards are ever used, there has to be proof that there is either threat of injury or injury.
I'm sure from the EU farmers' perspective, there's always an argument of the accumulation of trade deals, the impact they have on the sector. And of course, in the EU, there's this approach at farming from even a cultural perspective, not only as a business. No, we need to keep farmers in certain areas, as the commissioner was saying, to protect rural areas, to ensure that they're not depopulated, and well, even to protect borders, as the commission mentioned. So that's the argument I think some will make. MEP Aubry, I don't want this discussion to be unbalanced. I see who is looking at me. So yeah, I think we are running out of time, but if you would like to wrap this discussion with thoughts on what's next with trade policy and what could the EU do to better align it with the regulation it's imposing on its partners, maybe Ignacio could start.
Yes, thank you, Sofia. I think if there is a message that the wine sector wants to deliver is we need trade. We need trade and we need partnership. the wine sector without international trade, I mean, will be sink. Not sink because of the Australian or the Argentinian wine, will be sink. We move 50% of the wines that are produced in a country in the European Union, change of a border. And from this 50% which is exported, 50%, 44%, goes outside of the European Union. So around 25% of the wines we produce are going out, and those are the highest value wines. Without it, plenty of regions will disappear. Free trade agreements and the EU-Mercosur agreement, we need it. Free trade agreements are about partnership, and I think we can get, we have done with the European Union and between the European Union and Mercosur, a good balance between talking about pure trade and also using trade agreements to shake and to mobilize for the sustainability, to creating a playing field and shaking to improve sustainability. And I think the trade deal achieved it. I mean, humbly, from our point of view, we did it between the Mercosur and EU, and we need those trades. And we need to continue, because the world in which we are living is more uncertain than ever, and we need to be able to be part of the economies all around the world if we want to survive. We cannot depend on only one partner, because very dangerous.
Thank you, Flavio.
Try to be very short because it's indeed a difficult question. I think we need trade in the current environment in which things are so unpredictable. We need to diversify sources of supplies. So it's important both for import sources of our supplies, the supplies to the EU, and in terms of market outlets, our exports to the rest of the world. And I think trade reduces volatility, and we do have a lot of volatility right now on world trade. We can do that, and we are doing that in a way which preserves the sensitivity of certain sectors in the EU. So that's my reply to those who are concerned. I don't think that these concerns are justified. We understand them. And we pay full respect for those who are really concerned, and the farming sector is concerned about these effects. But we have sufficient arguments to explain that these concerns can be addressed through the different mitigating factors we have in the negotiation. One last word on standards, because this came across several times. It should be absolutely clear that we are not negotiating standards on safety. All products which are entering into the EU must comply with SPS requirements, with safety, human safety, animal safety, and plant conditions requirements in the EU. So that absolutely no question about it. If we're talking about something else, which is standards, environmental standards or ethical standards like animal welfare, that's of course a different subject, because that requires, first of all, that there is a legitimate objective in terms of environmental objective or ethical consideration. It has to be duly justified. There should be evidence that this is really a concern. That it's done in a non-discriminatory way, and once all these conditions are met, then we can possibly envisage the possibility of applying this standard to imported products under those conditions. But let's be clear, very often the requirements of compliance with these standards on environment and animal welfare will not completely fill the gap in order to achieve what we sometimes hear, a level playing field. There are factors of productions, inputs, for example, in terms of price of land, soil, labor, etc., feed, which play a much, much bigger role in terms of competitiveness with the rest of the world.
Ambassador.
I think my first message is to agree that we need partnerships, we need more trade. At least my country is looking for them, Mercosur is looking for them. The other message is that I think it will be very difficult for the EU to find a more aligned partner in terms of values and the sustainability agenda than Mercosur. And then my country, Brazil, we're very aligned. And when I talk about sustainability, I'm not talking only about the protection of the environment and biodiversity. I'm talking about also the rights of people, social and economic rights, because sustainable development is about that too. So that is my first message. My second message is that I think we can do a lot together if we start a conversation on cooperation in agriculture, because the discussion here is that we are a threat, that Mercosur is a threat, that Brazil is a threat, that this agreement is a problem, that we don't have standards, and that is simply not the case. I hope that now with the provisional application of the Mercosur agreement, and maybe today Brazil will present the ratification instrument to the EU, I don't know, hopefully, at the end of the day, that we will put to rest all this discussion, and we can talk about common challenges to our agricultural producers, because the commissioner said that the EU is an agri-food superpower, and so is Brazil. We're not talking about David and Goliath. We're talking about two Goliaths, and the agricultural sectors face some of the same challenges. Depopulation of the countryside, the issues of bureaucracy, now the new challenges, AI in agriculture, moving forward toward the use of bio-inputs, all of this, carbon farming, in which we are more advanced than you because of our national situation. So I think there is all this positive agenda that we can start talking about and work together. So this would be my message, a positive message, that we need to change a bit the conversation and turn into a positive win-win conversation.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very insightful and interesting conversation. A round of applause to my speakers. Thank you. Now I'm going to call the next panel on stability, competitiveness, and sustainability in the agri-food sector, moderated by our editor, Angelo De Mambro. Thank you.
Thanks. I have very bad news. We will recover the time in the coffee break that will last less. But the very good news is that we are going to have a conversation on the future of the CAP and of also non-CAP related issues with a fantastic panel. First of all, I invite to the podium Guy Schultheis from the DG Agri European Commission, and Elit Siforu, Secretary General of COPA Cogeca, Theo Paquet, Senior Policy Officer at European Environmental Bureau, leading the work on the CAP, and Niksha Talets, Special Committee on Agriculture spokesperson, permanent representation of Croatia to the European Union. So we are a bit late, so I will also be forced a bit to be concise. The CAP, over the past 30 years, the CAP was referring to an international framework that is fading out. This is not a common reform of the CAP. This is something that must respond to a paradigm shift in the international order. How this CAP must be equipped to face this challenge in, if you can, 3 concepts. Should we start from Mr. Schultheis? 2 minutes each. Deal? 2 minutes and a half? Okay, 2 minutes and a half.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. So you talk about 30 years. The CAP is 64 years old, and Paul McCartney is saying, "Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?" So our answer is yes, but it's indeed not business as usual. We heard the previous panel already. You heard the commissioner this morning. So what we have put on the table is an approach integrated with the other funds. We will talk about that, I'm sure, in this panel. So it's really an investment agenda. I think that is one of the key messages. Secondly, we have assured a good budget for the CAP, including income support and the socio-economic aspect is really important. Farm income remains a challenge. Then we have really focused on incentives for sustainability. So I think that is another key term. So budget, incentives for sustainability. And the third point I would like to make is that we have to do things also simpler. And this is not easy. I'm sure the other panel members will also comment on that, but we have put on the table a proposal which we believe will enable ourselves, will enable member states, and will enable farmers to have a simpler CAP in the future. Thanks.
Ellie.
Thank you, Angelo. Thank you for the invite. Happy to be here in this excellent panel. I think I would like to start by explaining a bit, because we need to have this discussion being aware of the context within which we need to work. So one is what you say, and you set the scene already, this new global order, the uncertainty, the unpredictability. I was very impressed as the members of the European Parliament last week. President von der Leyen made a very bold statement. She said that the EU can no longer be the custodian of a rules-based world that is not in place anymore, that has gone and will not return. And what does this mean? It means, okay, the EU, and she said that, she explained it, will continue on a rules-based agenda with its allies, but then it needs to strengthen its autonomy, its resilience, and that's why it is looking to competitiveness and security. So this is also an element that we need to have in mind when we discuss for the future of the support for the agricultural sector. And then another reality, which is inherent in the agricultural profession, is that this sector is by definition exposed and vulnerable to geopolitics. This is on the one hand, but on the other hand, it is a strategic sector when it comes to security, to resilience, to peace, to rural areas. So this is how we reflect in Copa-Cogeca. So against this background, what do we see on the table after the 16th of July proposals? So we see significant budgetary cuts. So I'm afraid I don't agree that we have a good budget. It's far from being enough. And we lose, for the first time since '62, the separate fund for agriculture. Then a dismantling of the the strategic two-pillar structure of the policy. Third element, a dismantling of the decision-making process, not only in the design, but also in the implementation of the policy that we believe will bring great uncertainty, adding to the global geopolitical and policy uncertainty, so policy uncertainty on top of it, and then the loss of commonality. And I believe the Court of Auditors has been quite clear at the beginning of February that this is a significant threat to the commonality of the implementation of the policy across the EU. And this is something, for all these elements, that Copa-Cogeca will put all our efforts technically and politically to change in the ongoing legislative process. Now, when it comes to the key question that you ask on this balance that has been a key strategic question for the policy of how to balance competitiveness and sustainability, environmental sustainability. This goes beyond the rules. This has to do with, and the rules, I agree, they need to be simple, implementable, but it's mainly about investing in the conciliatory power of innovation, of investing in innovation. And there, when it comes to investments in the future proposals, we see that they are part of the flexibility and the reforms mechanism. So the on-farm investments that are fundamental in order to engage in a safe way in the transition are not there. And then the discussion is also far beyond the CAP, because we have a setup of legislative proposals. There is also the Competitiveness Fund. And believe me, the agriculture community is looking very attentively to the opportunities in the Competitiveness Fund, because the CAP I will use an expression of my compatriot, former director in DG Agri, Tassos Chaniotis, is not a panacea. It cannot cover for all the big challenges. It's already doing a lot. So this is a bit my initial reflection.
Theo.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'll do the same and first take a very short step back. The way we're seeing the EU agricultural sector is that it faces three major vulnerabilities today. First one, I mean, we had the Mercosur panel earlier, so we've been talking about trades, we've been talking about imports. So we clearly have vulnerabilities when it comes to our external inputs. Fertilizers, energy, feed. The livestock sector being one of the sectors most exposed because it needs energy to produce fertilizers, to then produce the feeds. This feed needs to be complemented with soy that you're importing from oftentimes Latin America or the Americas in general. And on top of that, you also need to add other fertilizers, most of the time from not necessarily the Americas, but there's also Russia when it comes to fertilizers. They're not necessarily the most stable place in the world at the moment. Now, second vulnerability is this erosion of ecosystems. This is quite clear. We're degrading our soils. We have water pollution. We're losing biodiversity. All of this is hurting the competitiveness of the sector today. It's hurting the competitiveness of the sector in the long term because we need this baseline to actually keep producing. And finally, the hidden costs, also not so hidden. We had an EIB report I think it was a month ago or something, that shows the agriculture sector already has 28 billion euros of losses every year because of climate change. That's competitiveness today. So all of this being said, how do we move forward? We move forward by stopping to focus on short-term crisis management. And we have a CAP that's focused on building resilience long-term. What I'm talking about here is more circularity, more diversity, legume crops, for example, being one of those, more extensive livestock. And on this, the Commission has had quite a lot of proposals. So when it comes to the CAP, we do see quite a lot of positives, also negatives. Quite a lot of positives. We have measures now in place for diversification. We have measures in place to support extensive livestock. There's been quite a focus on protein crops, also developing new varieties, because those are lagging backwards when you compare to cereal crops, for example, and they're often not resilient to climate events. But what we don't need, and on this I'm afraid we'll have to disagree, is measures that are not targeted. We have a limited budget, so we can't afford to put all of our money, and the biggest part of our money, which is the case in this current proposal, on measures that are not there to build resilience, on measures that are there to actually fix the symptoms, not the root cause. Here I'm thinking about untargeted basic income support. I'm not saying we need to get rid of it today. I'm just saying that it needs to be phased out in favor of measures that actually build resilience for the sector long term. Thank you very much.
Niksha. Point of view of a member state.
Thank you, Angelo.
It's working.
Yep. Thank you, and good morning all, and thanks for having me here. Well, let me take a bit different spin to this point, and building on what was already said this morning by the Commissioner and the previous panel. I'd like to remind us all that EU, when it comes to quality and safety and sustainability of food production, is probably without a measure in the world. And too often, it seems to me that we tend to focus on the negatives in general. Let's not forget that, as was said, we are the global leader in the agri-food trade. And there are no, or very few, other economic sectors in the EU that can boast such a position, right? Yet, when the EU talks competitiveness, agri-food is rarely on the agenda. It's rarely a topic. Just take a look at the now famous couple of reports that have been produced in the last 2 years, where agriculture and agri-food is basically not even mentioned. So let's take a step back and realize that we have something here, that this sector that is strategic, which I have to say Commission has in the last couple of years rewoken up to that idea, and we see a range of initiatives that go along those lines. Of course, the MFF proposal is perhaps going in the other direction, but I'm sure we'll have a more opportunity to discuss this during the day. But, you know, we have this beautiful policy that has for 60 years supported the sector. We have the sector that has a strategic role today when issues like food affordability, food availability, food security in general, I mean, are, I have to add, sadly enough, once again, at the top of the political agenda. We really should recognize and acknowledge the fact that we produce food in Europe in a sustainable way. Of course, there is always space for improvement, and we do see with the next framework opportunities there. You asked 3 main points. Simplification, obviously, that was mentioned. Flexibility, no one size fits all. We really do need to start developing this policy place-based. As you know, Commissioner mentioned, you do not do agriculture the same way in Croatia, where I'm from, and you don't do it the same way in the southern and northern part of Croatia, as a matter of fact. So, flexibility, absolutely, and innovation. Thank you.
So let's start from this flexibility issue, because it came out also in the conversation with the Commissioner. There is no one size fits all and so on. But then how to ensure, and this is a question for DG Agri, how to ensure accountability in this? How the money is spent, and how the money, if we are giving, let's say we are decentralizing everything, we are giving to member states many choices, how to ensure accountability at European level?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's nice to hear all the perspective, and I see actually a lot of points that were made coming back. So on this issue of flexibility, I think we should realize that we are in an evolution of the common agricultural policy. Yeah? So we have already have rural development programs for a long time. We have since 2023 we have CAP strategic plans, which also leave a lot of flexibility to member states on how to plan the different CAP measures within an EU framework. And I know that the Court of Auditors had some views on the proposal we have made, but in terms of the budgetary spending and the accountability of how the CAP works now, they are quite happy as regards agricultural spending. So we are already in a situation where we have given member states considerable flexibility into how to plan the CAP. And what we do now in the proposal that's on the table, we actually take that a step further by integrating these CAP strategic plans in this wider plan. But I don't think this is a fundamental shift as to how we deal with the common agricultural policy. We really have EU-level provisions, and as some of you will know, as part of this new fund, the provisions for the CAP are actually more detailed than for some of the other areas of financial support. And that is precisely because we want to make sure that we have a common policy. We refer to that, to have a common policy, to have the flexibility, but within a system where there is a market for everybody that is fair.
And Tueli, you mentioned innovation, and also Niksha mentioned innovation. And when, because we wrote a lot about also the transfer of digital innovations, for instance, on the ground, on the farm, that is not that easy. And then you can have regulation, you can have the European Innovation Partnership that is working on territorial basis, or is not working on a territorial basis as you prefer. But the approach is there, but something is missing. So what the farmers community can do more, or can ask calls for being more receptive to to innovation?
Angelo, this is a good question, but I think it's not about being receptive. The key strategic question that we need to face right now when it comes to innovation is about how we are going to scale up. This is what we are missing right now. So across the EU, in all the 27 member states today, there are different types of innovations that are being developed, and digitalization is at the forefront. The issue now is how to make these solutions available and affordable to all EU farms. And there, we need to secure a strong investment pillar in the CAP, but also beyond the CAP. And I'm looking to the Competitiveness Fund, which has this infrastructure approach, this targeting, this objective looking to innovation. So we need a clear policy direction and support in order to do this scaling up and to be able to achieve the transition. And on the other hand, we cannot understand how we can still, after all these solutions that we have on the ground, all these innovations, all the academics, the literature, we can still have so close and narrow-minded perspectives like introducing, for example, measures supporting in a targeted way organic or extensive livestock. This is ignoring the fact that all types of production method can be sustainable if they have the solutions in place, intensive as well, non-organic. So it's ignoring what is happening right now. And it's perduring a perception that does not allow the sector to progress, both in the policy debate, but also in doing this scaling up. So everything needs to be put in place in terms of policy support, direction, rules, but also this investment scaling up that is necessary.
Theo, another recurrent theme, simplification. Now, in 2024, well, when the push for simplification started, the target was mainly the conditionality. How do you see the future of support to sustainable practices or green measures in the CAP?
So first, starting with simplification. First, I think it's important to say we're not, as environmental NGOs, against simplification. It's more a question of let's not reduce our ambition, let's make sure we achieve it in the simplest and most efficient way. I mean, Commissioner Hansen mentioned today the digital wallet, so making sure that farmers don't have to basically send different types of sustainability data to the public authorities, to their private contractors, etc. Now, when it comes to the actual proposal, we do see a major concern with the way they've simplified it, if I can say so, in the sense that we've been talking about commonality. And right now, at least when it comes to farm stewardship, I'm very afraid to say I don't see where the commonality is going to be. Because member states have a lot of space for exemptions. The Commission is going to give recommendations, and that's, I mean, you've mentioned it a few times on panels, Reis, and I think Catherine as well, that basically the Commission's recommendations are going to be able to steer the member states in actually designing those farms to those protective practices. But member states don't want those recommendations to be binding. So member states are going to be able to do what member states want to do. And if you have a farmer in a certain country that sees that a farmer in a neighboring country has weaker rules, he's going to complain. I mean, we're seeing it with Mercosur, but within the EU internal market, you're going to have the same thing. And so we're quite worried we're going to be seeing a race to the bottom. Now, we also all agreed in the strategic dialogue a year and a half ago now, that we would move towards more incentives. Okay. Now, we're all in favor of this, more carrots, but if you have a lot of positive tools but you don't have dedicated funding, then the carrots are not there, and you're removing the sticks. So for us, this is very much what we need to fix today. And yes, we have targets for spending on the environment and climate. Here, the methodology is flawed. And basically reintroducing ring fencing for environmental and climate incentive measures is also going to help member states, because some member states that today have ambitious plans in place, I'm thinking of Austria, for example, but not only, Germany as well, they have ambitious plans, they have farmers that like the measures that they have in place. They're not sure how much budget they're going to have in the next cap. And if you're looking at only short-term competitiveness, then maybe they will lose out in those first couple of years. But in the long term, those measures are beneficial for farmers and should be on the ground with significant budget.
So, Nisha, flexibility can be a race to the bottom, and also I would like you to, because to have some news also from this talk. You are from the council, and in the council the discussion on the budget has resumed at political level, because in 4 weeks it was at a technical level with all the meetings of all the different groups, ad hoc working parties and so on. So first question is, from a member state's point of view, do you think that the new CAP is leading to an exaggerated flexibility for member states on environmental measures? And also a question on what can you give us on the budget? How's it going in the council? Because this is the main place now where it is negotiated.
Well, let me start with the second one.
Yeah.
The easy
okay. It's easy. Okay.
Yeah, right. It's complicated.
Okay.
It's complicated. I mean, I wouldn't say that we are yet at the political stage of the discussions. We are still very much analyzing and actually discussing issues of structure of the proposal, the architecture of the proposal, rather than the substance for real. And you know, these negotiations are always complicated and always complex. This time around, due to the nature of the proposal, it is 100-fold times more. I mean, for me, for my team, in order to be on top of things, to know what's going on, you know, to be able to follow the negotiations adequately, I have horizontal agricultural questions working party. I have agri-products. I'm sitting in the special committee on agriculture. I have performance framework. Of course, on top of that comes the COREPER and a few council formations. So what we detected when the proposal landed, first and foremost, was this issue of lack of coherence. And for us, this is sine qua non. We can really discuss the essence of the proposal and see whether or not, which I got to say I don't really agree, but that's normal. But first of all, we need to deal with the fact that you know, this is not manufacturing. You cannot build a part of the machine in one factory and another part in another, and then bring it to the assembly line and everything will work in the end. We need to be able to see the entirety of the package in order to be able to negotiate on a single little part of it, because everything is interrelated, more so in this case than it was in the previous ones.
And you were saying you were not agreeing on the race to the bottom to given
no,
flexibility.
I do not. I mean, we've heard the same criticism last time around. You know, remember when we introduced the eco schemes, there was a lot of resistance to it. There was a lot of criticism and fears that since this will not be obligatory, that the sector will not reach its targets, and yet we see that our farmers love the measures. And if we make them more flexible, which the Commission's proposal in essence does, I don't see why we wouldn't experience the same approach in the next period. You know, of course, the balance between the flexibility and the commonality, if you want, is going to be a very difficult one to strike. since this proposal does offer member states a much wider leeway than we are even used to, and that perhaps we feel comfortable with. But on the other hand, when it comes to the farming community, when it comes to the producers, I have no fear there. No, not at all.
I guess the balance between flexibility and commonality, many are confident in these recommendations to come, that at the same time are not binding, as Theo was saying. So what kind of legislative animal will be that, if it will be legislative? And what's the state of the play?
Well, recommendations are what they are, recommendations. So I don't think I have to explain English to anybody in the room here, so I don't think we have to make it a mystery. But obviously this will be very important for the Commission, and we will also look at what member states come with on the basis of our recommendations. That will be our reference point. But maybe I was kind of thinking you started with quite an ambitious question at the start of this panel, 30 years, global insecurities, and we have managed to kill the joy by talking about all the bureaucracy that is to do with the common agricultural policy, and which is perfectly fine. I mean, this is, I guess, an event with a lot of insiders, but I think it's important to take that step back that you did at the beginning and to say, okay, why is there a proposal that is different than what we've been doing so far? And I think that answers also to some of the concerns, because I think we've come with a different proposal because the world is different. Choices you made on organic and extensive livestock, why have we targeted those sectors? Why would we say for some support this should be targeted at extensive livestock farming, and why should we prioritize organic? Precisely because we think with the scarce resources we need to make choices, and we need to put the choices where we believe that public policy has this added role to play. And that is also in a way the answer to direct income support. We keep that, but targeted. We propose degressivity, we propose capping, we propose that member states need to focus on certain groups of farmers that really need it more than others. In other words, we need to use the resources wisely because we have this wider agenda to deal with, this uncertainty in the world. And then I come to the point that I started with. It's an investment agenda. The whole NRP, National and Regional Partnership Plan proposal, is an investment agenda to stimulate innovation. You brought innovation up. So I think that is what we really need to focus on with European agriculture. We need to innovate to achieve our sustainability objectives, the economic sustainability objectives, innovation driving income growth for farmers, but also environmental as well as social objectives. So I think that is the real real question we have on the table is, can we just continue? And our answer is no. We need to focus on this investment agenda and use the resources we have in a more efficient way and really target it at the sectors that need it.
Excuse me if I'm bureaucratic, but must stop that. No, but because I'm obsessed with the fact that we speak a lot, but then we have to deliver. So why, if this is all about innovation, while one of the greatest concerns was to have the same measures financed in the new framework and not new measures for innovations, for instance?
Well, because we also realize that a lot of these measures have an important role to play, but it's also the balance between the measures. And of course, we have merged the CAP with the other funds to enable synergies between those funds, which enables also member states to target financial means at agriculture and at agribusiness, at cooperatives, to innovate in the agri-food sector. We have agriculture as one of the areas, together with health and bioeconomy, food, as one of the areas of the European Competitiveness Fund. So on different areas, we really prioritize also the agriculture and bioeconomy sectors as priorities for the innovation agenda.
Ellie, you started saying that this structure of the budget does not convince you. The fact that for the first time there is no distinct CAP budget. But we have just heard about it. It will be better because synergies will be better and so on. So why are not you convinced?
I believe it's simple. It adds uncertainty. It adds complexity. It will add for the beneficiaries, for the farmers, burden. I mean, the member states, and I'm referring to the council right now, what they see with this new structure for the moment, and I'm talking to the formations that are beyond the agri-fish, what they see is a possibility to play, let's say, with the funds and to create these synergies and adapt. But what they don't see is that when we will get into the implementation phase, it will be an administrative chaos, and we will have politically very complex situations in the member states when it comes to the war of stakeholders on who will be the priority. So it has so many implications, both budgetary, but also in terms of the implementation and the delivery of the policy. And we cannot accept, especially in the current context within which we need to work and to think as Europeans, that we have to abide as farming community with a restricted budget. It is not acceptable. We believe that because of the current context, we need enhanced support to the farming sector, which is at the basis of, Nixa said it very clearly, of the agri-food success story of the EU. So the economic footprint of the overall agri-food sector is far beyond other sectors of the EU. So if we're talking about strengthening the competitiveness, we need to invest in agriculture. So all this discussion about having to target the money because we have less budget is something that we cannot accept. We need to match the ambitions, we need to match the challenges, and we are far from being there. And then let me say also, because I believe in this discussion there are a lot of misunderstandings. Misunderstanding number one, it's a different thing to target, and it's a different thing to see how you can more fairly distribute the payments. And then when it comes to the essence of the payments, because here I react to what Theo said before, the direct payments, and we tend to all forget this, why are they in place? Why does the income, the basic income support is in place? It's for a basic reality which is inherent in the profession. We are lagging far behind other sectors when it comes to the revenue, to the income of farmers, and then it's by definition the riskiest profession one can exercise. So there needs to be a safety net. This is the core essence. So I don't understand this discussion that we need to completely forget about the income support. We tend to forget what is the core essence and why it's there. So let's talk by having in mind the basics, but also the challenges and the ambition.
And the challenge and the ambitions also are a matter of, are a matter of risk management, and we have long-term risk management, as you mentioned, and short-term risk management. From an environmental NGO point of view, how the EU should give answers on this theme, risk management in farming? Because, yeah, of course, long-term means investments, support for investments, but also short-term is important for farmers that lose their farms due to a climate, to a extreme weather event. So, yeah. What's your point?
Maybe if I can just answer quickly to Ellie's point. I completely agree. It is one of the riskiest professions, and they do need support. I think that's also why when today we're talking about the production side of things. We're talking about the CAP, we're talking about innovation, but we also need to talk about the full food system. We also need to talk about fair pricing for farmers. I think that's also why, obviously when I say we need to move away from direct income support, I'm also clearly saying farmers need to be paid an adequate wage, they need to be paid properly for their products. So that's also something you need to take in place, obviously not necessarily directly in the CAP, CMO, UTP directive, etc. Now, when it comes to risk management, I think one clear point, one clear avenue there is you basically have those insurance schemes in place, whether it's for climate events or other or market measures, for example. When it comes to climate events, what could be a very positive way forward is that when you're providing support for a farmer that has had a climate event on his farm and needs to be supported to get back on his feet, that there are advantages to him. If he puts in place mitigation measures for future events, he can get a better discount, a better rate on his insurance, for example. Those types of measures that really link the money that farmers need today to be able to survive with long-term climate mitigation, climate adaptation, biodiversity, all of this building resilience, so you don't need to pay it again the next year. I think it's very important that we link those two points together.
Nisha, I was thinking about, because all this flexibility means also that member states have to, of the discussing flexibility, I mean, means also that member states are called into cause into their transposition on certain rules. And in the past, we have seen that sometimes the simplification is a very narrow path because for farmers, because it goes, it must, on one side you have the EU regulation, and on the other side you have the national regulation. What happens? How this can happen, and what happens in a member state when something goes beyond the intention? Let's say, what's the psychology? Because it's happening for different things in many corners of Europe.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting question. But let me just briefly touch upon what my colleagues and friends already said. I think, you know, I would actually agree with all three of you in parts, because it's absolutely true that we do need to change things. That you know, 5 years ago this was a completely different world. I don't know when last time in 5 years we've changed so much the reality. So of course we do need to change, but whether or not we are, let me put it this way, I do not see this as a cap reform, what was proposed. This is a budget reform. And it's done with the goal of making a budget different, not making a policy different or better. And what the end result of that will be, let's wait and see. But on your question, you know, we have to be fair. It's often actually us, the member states, or the co-legislators, which for whatever reasons tend to make already complicated proposal even more complex. One of the games in the council is to ensure that, you know, you have all the other member states and their producers in check, just like their goal is to have you in check. That's the name of the game. And that one way or another leads to the further complexity of the system. And then you have it at the national stage, and on the national side, for example, the famous gold plating, where when we as a national administration impose further rules than what is the bare minimum that is adopted and negotiated and accepted at the EU level. Why this happens? There's a range of reasons, but and this is something that we do hope with the next proposal we can solve to a certain extent. You know, there is a fear of audits in the national administrations. There is excessive controls, and in order to avoid, nobody likes to lose money. So you know, in order to avoid the commitments, sometimes you pile these controls upon controls of different bodies in the system, which then in the end make it so difficult to implement and to really. Our framework is often such that it stifles the entrepreneurship of our producers. And that should change, yeah.
So I would do the last tour, proposing again the question at the beginning, but in a slightly different way. So at the beginning, I said, how should this CAP evolve? It is already evolving. How it is responding to this, to the challenges that were identified in the title of this panel. How it is responding? What are the characters that will help the CAP? It is just a budget revolution, or is there something really new?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. I think I tried to reply to that previously by zooming in on innovation and investment, which I think is one important response. The other response is on environmental sustainability, the focus on incentives, but also on the transition payments that we have introduced as a possibility for member states. In other words, to help farmers transit from one production system to another, for example, in the face of climate change. So we believe that those sort of transitions are important, and we want to help member states, to help farmers to be able to deal with that, because I think the key word probably is resilience of our farming systems in the future, and many of the CAP tools support that. And the third point that I would like to raise as an answer to your question is the focus on generational renewal. We've put out a strategy, I'm sure the Commissioner mentioned it also this morning, last year, and there is a toolbox for generational renewal in our CAP proposal, really bringing together a lot of different instruments that we believe are very important to help a new generation of farmers and to attract new farmers to agriculture. Because if you think about the challenges that you list in your question in terms of competitiveness and sustainability, we need more people to actually start with a farm and have the belief that they can earn a decent living, they can have a good life in farming and produce the food that we all need. Thanks.
Ellie, you made it clear at the beginning why you don't like this proposal. But are there elements there that can help really to be?
I'm sorry I sounded so negative. I mean, I'm not like that as a person, and we are not like that as a farming community. But here, we need to understand something. And Angelo, I might be able to say more about our detailed views on the proposals after April, where we will hopefully advance in our internal discussions. And you know, we are a mini council in Copa-Cogeca, so it takes a bit of time. But we have another issue here, which has to do with the context of these proposals. They were prepared in a way, and this goes far beyond their responsibilities and what all the efforts that the good colleagues from DG Agri have put there, in complete secrecy, and without following all the key milestones that we always follow when we prepare a reform. So the initial impact assessment, the communication presenting the scenarios based on which we are able, with our massive representativeness and our basis within all the member states, to consult them and to feed in with our ideas. This didn't happen this time. It was completely disruptive for us. So I'm afraid I cannot go further in telling you in detail what we find good in the proposals. This will come in a few weeks. But what I would like to say, if this is my last point, is that we need in the co-legislative process, which is open, to make all the efforts necessary to secure the budgetary aspect of the policy, but also to protect, let's say, the individuality of the toolbox. This is where we are heading. The Parliament is working, the Council is working, we are ready to contribute towards this direction. It is fundamental, not out of a vice to keep in place the status quo. It is a pure necessity to secure a strong sector which is strategic and vulnerable at the same time.
Thanks, Ellie. So you still don't like it, but you are keeping fighting for your priorities in the legislative process. And what about you, Theo?
So first, I agree with you in terms of the process. And again, I know this was not necessarily DG Agri, but the way it was done, rushed, did not make it easy for everyone. For me, it's probably easier than for you to actually come up with, so for the European Environmental Bureau to come up with a position. So maybe I can go into a couple of positive points to finish the panel. Here, we are very much supportive of this new transition scheme that the Commission has proposed. Needs perhaps some improvements, not even just talking about the actual funding dedicated to it. We see that as very positive because it de-risks probably the most complicated and riskiest parts of a farmer actually shifting his system. So that's very positive, a lump sum payment over multiple years, looking at the entire farm. But at the moment, it just says towards a resilient system, leaves it completely up in the air what a resilient system is. I mean, I have some ideas of what it could be, but every single member state is going to do something different, which they should because they have different systems in place. But at least some commonality would be positive to ensure that we still have some sort of leveling play field and actually all going in the same direction. And then maybe two other positives. One is the big focus on protein crops. We have a clear dependency there, so the focus of the Commission there is welcome. And the last one on actually supporting farmers that are in areas of high nitrogen pollution and actually supporting those farmers and making member states actually provide them with schemes so they can actually shift their practices to ensure that they have an ecosystem baseline that they can work with for future generations.
Niksha, how do you see from a member state perspective, how do you see the legislative process evolve?
Well, let me put it this way. If this package was adopted today, it would be an absolute nightmare for member states. From the perspective of the end beneficiary, from the perspective of the farmer, we do see there are really good elements in there, and we do expect that the final product will be such that for our beneficiaries, for those who matter the most, this will be a good framework. However, to get there, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And we most definitely do want to avoid that situation which Ellie mentioned earlier, where you know, at the level of the member state, you have to go through a gruesome, bloody battle in order to secure the necessary funding, which is, as I say, necessary. Now, the flexibility that is embedded in the system, if we play it smartly, will provide us with the tools to do so. The recommendations which you touched upon, if done jointly between the member states and the Commission, with what I said at the beginning, the flexibility, the place-based approach, this can really be a game changer. And I'm certain it will take us a long time, but we'll get there.
Thanks, Niksha, and thanks to all the panelists. There is a lot of work ahead, and as reporters, we would like to report about it and to inform you about it. Thanks, Niksha Talek, and Theo Paquet, Elliot Siforu, and Gis Schilthuis for being with us. Very short coffee break, and let's say 5 minutes, if you are able. Thank you very much.
everybody. Feel free to take a seat, and I can welcome my speakers on stage.
Let's hear the MEP.
Good morning. My name is Maria, Agrifood reporter at Euractiv. Thanks for staying with us. I'll be the moderator for the next panel called New Perspectives in the Food Chain. I don't know if they will be new, but they will definitely be different perspectives. So please let me welcome our speakers today. We have MEP Herbert Dorfmann, member of the Agri Committee and the EPP's coordinator for agriculture, actually. Stoyan Shokhanov, president of the NAT section at the EESC. Francesca Monteverdi, policy advisor for trade justice at Oxfam. And Gonzalo Corrales Tiganda, representative of Spanish Unión de Pequeños Agricultores, meaning small producers. So I remind the audience that you can ask questions through Slido. And I think we can kick it off strong. I'm always lucky enough to have the panel after the coffee break, so hopefully you're energized. I wanted to know first how far you think we are from a truly fair food chain, because seeing the tractors in Brussels quite often, I'm assuming we're not quite there yet. Call me a pessimistic, but I want to hear about you. How far are we from getting there? If MEP Dorfmann wants to start first, perhaps.
Well, good morning, first of all. I would say, unfortunately, quite far away. And I mean, if I look at what happened in the last 3 to 4 years, if I look at the inflation we had in the food sector, and try to calculate how many billions European consumers paid more for food going to the supermarket, and how many of these billions really ended up in the pockets of the farmers, that is not a good calculation or a nice calculation for the farmers, unfortunately. And this demonstrates how complicated the sector is, or the chain is. And I'm aware, and we tried, and also in the European Parliament, as you know, to work on the UTPs. There were some improvements, but there's still a lot to do. And I think we need a more long-term vision, because I understand very well. I mean, I understand people who are or companies who are in the chain, that they try to work as profitable as possible. But if in the middle long term this ends up that the farmers in Europe cannot produce anymore, and they need to and food needs to be bought outside, and on some sectors this is already the case, this cannot be a long-term vision. So I think it's also in the interest of the retailers and the industry to have a food chain which is somehow rewarding the whole chain, because otherwise I have the impression that on some products it's simply not profitable anymore for the farmers.
Mm-hmm. So I see I'm not the only pessimist here. Stoyan, would you also say we're still far from a truly fair food chain?
Well, yes, first, what is fair? How you define fair? Maybe this is the first question, because in many cases, actually, that's where this is the first bottleneck, because it's a system, right? Mm-hmm. So if we disturb one part of the system, we are disturbing the whole system. That's from the physics, it's very simple. So now, let's say we are disturbing I'm not saying the most important part, but let's say the fuel tank, mm-hmm. because everything starts there. So how are we going to keep going? And that's why I align with Herbert long term. Because by losing the viability of the farms in Europe, we know the statistics, I don't want to repeat, what are we going to do if we rely only on, let's say, on the cooling or ignition or the transmission parts without the fuel? So what are we doing over there? But that's why, in order to really to ensure the viability of the system, we need to ensure that all the parts are functioning properly. And in our committee, we represent the three groups: employers, trade unions, and farmers and civil society organizations. So they have their point on what is fair. And it's impossible to ignore, because otherwise, again, we're going to break the system. So, just to start.
So, Francesca, whatever fair is or means, are we getting there?
I have to agree with the other speakers saying no, we are not there. We currently underline the fact there is a discrepancy with what consumers are paying in supermarket and what comes in the pocket of farmers. I give a concrete example. In Italy, from 2021 to 2025, there was 25% of inflation. Yet, when consumers buy 100 euros of grocery on fruit and vegetables, the farmer gets only 7 euros out of that. So, for us, is a crucial and important issue is how this value is distributed along the food supply chain. And we believe there is space to do it in a way that is remunerative for the farmers. So, for us, fairs ultimately comes as well for having costs that are covered when farmers sell their products on the market in a way that is remunerative for them, and they can can fund their remuneration on the market.
Gonzalo, I also guess you have a lot of experience on the ground, so what do you think?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation and giving us farmers, small, medium farmers, the possibility to bring our experience, our practice, and our worries about this. For us, I will start saying that this is the flagship of our activity, of our work. I mean, we have the CAP, it's important, we have many issues, but for us, a good food chain law is essential. This is the core of the problem, because the core of the problem for farmers is that they have a lack of fair prices. So a farmer wants to live for their life, for what he produces. So for us, it's important having this UTP directive, the update, and I want to bring here and explain a little bit, if you allow me, the experience we have in Spain with the Ley de Cadena Alimentaria, which is very, very in the front line of together with France, in recognizing and protecting the farmers for abusive practice. I think these two elements have contributed a lot. So my first question or my first remark is that the law works. Actually, it works, and we can identify. I can give you many examples, but for example, in fruits and vegetables, some years ago, there was not contracts at all. It was an exceptional situation. You can imagine in which sector you go to everywhere and you have a contract. But in the farming sector, it is a reality that we didn't have contracts until the Ley de Cadena Alimentaria started to be applied. The same I can say in the wine sector. We have standard contracts agreed during the interbranch links. So I think that my first important remark wants to be that recognizing the importance of having UTP's directive most uniform, harmonized in Europe, and take it seriously, because we risk a lot of the survival of farmers on this issue. Thank you.
So we'll definitely dig into the Spanish and French cases later. Now we can get a bit more nerdy and dive into all these acronyms: UTPs, CMO, CAP. One could say the holy trinity for the food chain. To make sure we're all on the same page, we have the UTPs directive. There's practices that are unconditionally banned, like last-minute cancellations, and some that might be agreed between parties. So are these rules working? And we'll have a review of them. So what are your expectations and fears there too? Herbert, if you want to start again.
I think they are working. If I speak with who is selling products, I'm coming from a region where we sell apples all over Europe and all over the world, and And if I speak with the cooperatives, they tell me, yes, on some sectors it works. For example, on late payment, we had enormous improvement in the last years. Clearly, we have different implementation of this directive. It's a directive, it's not a regulation. We have different implementations. We have better ones, like in France, like in Spain, and also in Italy, I think. We have others, member states, which were delayed in implementation and where the implementation is weaker. But I think it's more or less working. You know, some weeks ago we improved this on cross-border cooperation, so that is a further improvement. And we are looking forward to have another, let's say, another proposal from the Commission side in order to improve the system. I think this can be done. But we shouldn't have the illusion that with an UTP regulation or directive you can solve the whole problem. We need to strengthen the sellers, so especially the small farmers, more cooperation, more cooperatives, more investment. I see, for example, in the fruit and vegetable sectors, all the investment we did in the last decades on operational programs at the member state level, that helped because this became big sellers. And then I think we have also a problem on the competition law in Europe, because we allowed too many mergers in the retail sector, and we need to have a proper look on buyers groups, because we have very few big retailers and even less buyers. And for the chain, the question is not how many retailers you have, the question is how many buyers you have. And if you look at the arena today in Europe, it is tremendous, because we have fundamentally less buyers than fingers on my hand. And this cannot work. And I think we need to have a look also into competition law. And the competition law in Europe is very much consumer-oriented. And I understand that, let's say, high pressure from the retailer side sometimes for the consumer is an advantage because it brings down prices. The question is, what is in the long term? Is it really a long-term interest of the consumer to have a non-functioning chain? And shouldn't the competition laws have a look on the whole chain and not only on the benefit of the final consumer?
Back to Stoyan, we also heard that the main ambition for the review of the UTP's directive would be doing something about sales below production cost. So what are you expecting or fearing here?
Well, let's make clear that 2 years ago, actually, the European Economic and Social Committee, we launched an evaluation of the UTP, which is part of our process because we participate in the legislative work through giving an opinion, etc. But then a few years later, we are launching this evaluation, and it was launched in 5 member states. So yes, France and Spain, it's not part of the evaluation, that's for obvious reasons. But first, Germany is part of it. Hungary, Estonia, Slovenia, Bulgaria. So I was part of this evaluation, and I had a chance to speak with many stakeholders because, again, coming from the 3 groups, we speak also with the supermarkets, but with the farmers, with all the actors in the value chain. So overall assessment is that actually the directive delivered poorly. Yeah, I'm sorry to tell you, but this is written in our evaluation, especially in the smaller member states, relatively smaller member states. There is a huge difference among Germany, for example, and Estonia, absolutely. So even because it was a colleague of mine that is coming from France, she was surprised about the market concentration in Bulgaria, because it was mentioned by Herbert, some of the supermarkets, they have such a power, they totally dominate the market. So it's impossible, basically, to get around. That's the reality. And of course, because we're speaking about the blacklist, many of the gray list actually first of all, this is a process. They reinvent, especially after COVID, new practices that are not touched by the directive, and that's clear because why not? And second, it's just even if you have a mandatory contract, you have let's say clauses of certain clauses that actually basically it's impossible to complain, and it's impossible to share details because of the confidentiality. So in certain cases, on the ramp, you have already 100% market up, delivering something already packaged with the labels, etc., which is killing the small producers, that's clear. So yes, of course, we do understand that from 2019, we have a lot of events that happened already. We went through COVID, to lockdown, etc., So I think the update, it's not necessary, it's needed, and it's due.
So blacklist, grey list, what must change in the UTP's directive, Francesca? And what has worked or has not?
So we believe that UTP is a good starting point. So there is something, as the evaluation showed, that has been improved, for example, late payment, etc. But there is a lot to be done, and in particular when it comes to fair prices, this is not covered by the UTP directive. And if we remember, farmers went on the street, and one of the core demands was acting to stop the practice of selling below production costs. This was also in the mission of Commissioner Hansen. So one of the biggest fear we have is that this ambition that was there is lacking now, because the debate is diluted in other topic. So one of the core demands that we have in terms of fair trade movement, other farmers' organization and civil society, is to have a ban to purchasing below sustainable production cost in the revision of the directive. This is because we need to act on this abuse. Farmers are still in the weak position, and this needs to be addressed in the directive. Of course, it's not going to be perfect. We have examples, as we mentioned, in Spain that are working. We have other examples in Belgium or in France. They are not perfect, but we believe that we need to have this prohibition in the blacklist. I give the example of Belgium, for example. We have the prohibition to buy below cost in the law since July 2004. 2024, it's working more or less because it's in the grey list. Grey list means that party needs to can agree in the contract and continue to have this practice going on. So because of that, in Belgium, there are farmers that are still selling below production cost. This is complemented as well with some sectorial practices. For example, there is a lack of written contract in Belgium. And this, of course, we see the need for written contract complementary to the UTP, because if you don't have the practice in the contract, then it's difficult to understand if it's unfair trade practice or not. And also the lack of a strong producer organization as well is not helping the ban, which is already in the grey list, to endure. We are calling for the blacklist because there is a strong disparities of power in the supply chain. So if it's not in the blacklist, of course, we will have need for some exception, for example, for products that are close to expiration date. But yeah, we believe the Spanish example nowadays is the strongest one, and is based on farmers' individual production cost, helped with some sectorial benchmark. So yeah, the most important things that we would like to see in the UTP is really addressing the ban in the legislation. Then of course there are other issues like awareness raising, etc. But yeah, for me that's the most important one.
Thank you. Gonzalo, can you walk us through this Spanish case that some say it's an inspiration and others would say is too strict or not workable actually?
Yes, well, as I said at the beginning, in my view, in my organization, at UPAC, we consider that the law is having an effect, a positive effect, but as MEP Dorna said, it is not something that can be the revolution. I mean, when you introduce something like that, this kind of tools, which actually is a tool, a mechanism to improve and protect farmers from abuses, the importance of this is that we have to change the mentality. And so the first point that I want to highlight in Spain is the concept of mentality, or mindset. we start, instead of constructing the price from the top to down, we are starting to do the opposite, starting to create the price from the bottom to top. So that's the same thing that I wanted to remark, because what the spirit of the Spanish law looks for is to guarantee each part of the chain a dignity, a respectful price. No one must lose any production cost during the process. So this is the first point I wanted to highlight. Also, secondly, about more in detail of the Spanish law is what my colleague said. We are not, and I want to clarify this, fixing minimum prices, because it is against competition law. So I have to be very clear in saying that we are not fixing prices. What we are doing is establishing with the ministry and regional authorities index, orientative effective cost, and we have to add the eventual cost that each farmer has. So what we consider, and what the law says, is that the farmer must be paid the next part of the chain, the buyer, always the buyer, with regards to the seller, must pay at least the cost prices. So for that, you can do by demonstrating which it's logical that in any activity you know what are your cost productions. When you have a shop, when you have any company, they know what are their cost production. So with these orientative prices, we create this, and I think it's very, very important. But as I said, this is not a magic key. It's the starting point. We have a lot of things to do. And as I said at my intervention during the first part, the most important is going to the origin, to the root, which is the price. And we want to bring here and explore something that we are trying to analyze in Spain, which is collective bargaining. I know that because of the Commission, it's not possible nowadays have this, but it has been said. There is a lot of atomization of farmers, are just a few ones that have the power of imposing price. So having the possibility, like in other activities, like in other sectors or operations, we want to explore the possibility of collective bargaining. It can be done by interbranch professionals or different channels in which we can negotiate the prices. Otherwise, we will be always pressured by the price.
So we've heard mentioned to several countries, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy. Would you say, Herbert, that this should really be the way ahead and that the EU should learn from these cases?
Well, I think in Europe it's always nice to learn from each other, because this is one of the fascinating things we have in the European Union. We have 27 member states, and on many sectors, not only in the food chain, some are doing better and some are doing worse, and learn from the better is always good. And I think we have examples in Europe, in France, in Spain, also in Italy, where things work better. So we can have a look how it works there, how we can improve this, going also maybe from a directive to a regulation and trying to have a more, let's say, uniform application all over Europe. I think it would be important also to create awareness among the consumers, because I think very often the consumers are not aware of what's happening. I always make the example because it's close to my heart, the sector of apples. No, can take fruit and vegetables. If I go to a supermarket here in Belgium and I buy the apples from my region, this I can do. If I'm a lucky guy, I get them for €2.99. If I'm not so happy, it's €3.99. I don't know if the consumer is aware that the farmer at home is more than happy if he or she gets 50 cents. I don't think the consumer is aware about these things. How that to produce this apple or this salad or whatever for all over a year and bring it to the cooperative is 50 cents. and taking this apple, pack it, bring it to Belgium and put it in the supermarket is €2.50. And I think this shows how unbalanced things are. And I think also this awareness is important to make pressure also on the whole chain.
But of course, France, Spain's laws are not out of controversy. We've heard a lot of criticism, especially of the EGalim rules. So I have more of a provocative question now, because during a debate last month, DG Agri's Fabien Santini joked that the EGalim rules made him regret being a French national. I'm now wondering if he regrets using those words. But in any case, is the EU at a crossroads between becoming more interventionist in the market or letting the free market do its magic? Any volunteers?
Well, maybe this is a nice way to bridge to the CMO legislation. Yeah, because that's I see this question as leading toward this topic. Well, it was mentioned by Gonzalo. Yes, we need a bargaining power. So CMO is clearly trying to put some more clarity in this regard, because what we have 22,000 cooperatives in Europe, owned by 7 million farmers, right? So if we really truly empower them to be more meaningful in the negotiation process, then we can kind of divert your question, the direction toward a more sustainable way to produce and to deliver to the consumers, because there is many examples. It's not only the apples. It's cauliflowers. It was a very popular example. 40 cents from the farmer, €4 in one big supply chain supermarket, doing nothing, because let's say with the apples, you have to sort them, you have to put it in some kind of boxes or something like this. You have red, yellow, etc., etc. No, cauliflower is just cut and then immediately, from 40 cents, €4. Come on. So that's why we need to definitely intervene in this proportionality and this gap. CMO, it's a good step forward. But again, I think we live in the market society, so we need to empower much more the cooperatives and the bargaining power coming from the farmers, because nobody else is going to take care of your interest better than you. It's that clear.
Herbert, you wanted to add something, I think?
Yeah, I want to add to your provocation. I'm very much supporting a free market, and I think we are living in a free market. This is a good thing. But also a free market needs rules. A free market doesn't mean that everybody can do whatever he or she wants. But I'm also, and so I need this market needs some rules, and we need to have a look if we can establish rules which create some fairness, even if I'm aware that the word fairness, if it comes to economy, is not always that easy to define what is fair. But then it's clear that also in agriculture, we are in a free market. In the free market, there's a question of offer and demand. And if you look at the inflation in the last years, we have some sectors where the increase of price, or a big part of the increase of price, ended up in the pocket of the farmer. For example, in the milk sector. The milk price for the farmers doubled in the last years. Is today double? Today, no, because we went down again. But 1 month ago, 2 months ago, was double the price 3 years ago. And this was a question that the milk was not available on the market. There was no offer. And other sectors, for example, all the chain which is connected with cereals, so bread, pasta, all these things, we are at a historical low price for wheat in Europe and for cereals, but the price in the supermarket is relatively high because there was enough offer. And so this, and I think on the CMO, we did a step now on contracts. We have to work also on market pooling, on market rules in Europe, because we need to strengthen also the farmers. with contracts, and I consider it a pity that the Parliament's position to impose written contracts to everybody didn't fly, or at least didn't fly 100%. I was very much in favor of this. Maybe with the next reform we can go a step further on CMO rules. I think we need to improve also the market position of the farmers to make them stronger. And there are a lot of measures we can do without going into, let's say, a market which is not market driven anymore.
Mm-hmm. I have a follow-up, speaking of the CMO and milk, another provocative one, because at the same event where Mr. Santini joked about his nationality, your German colleague Norbert Linz said that different countries should be able to defend their own models. He was referring to German milk cooperatives. He said, I'm quoting, "If the French and the Italians like to regulate everything, they can do that, but they should let our structures in Germany, Denmark, Ireland to continue." So you mentioned that the UTPs could perhaps go from a directive to a regulation. Is there really appetite for that?
Well, I mean, I followed the whole debate about the written contracts. I'm in favor because I think written contracts are a security for the farmers. And by the way, if you look what's happening today in the milk market, and clearly milk prices are going down everywhere. But in the member states, for example, in my own in Italy, where we have written contracts, there is much more price stability than in other markets. So where we don't have written contracts. So it's honestly, I didn't really, and I don't really understand the position of the German milk producers. I understand very well of the dairy industry, but I really didn't really understand why the milk producers were so much against this system of written contracts. I think clearly it's always, if you need to change something, it's always a duty, and we always risk at the European level that we go into a bureaucratic system, and bureaucracy in this moment of time is the biggest challenge we need to fight against. We have all the omnibuses in the parliament trying to fight against bureaucracy, I'm well aware, but I think that if I produce something and I have a contract which guarantees me a market is not bad. And we have a lot of examples in Europe where we see that it works.
Mm-hmm. So we transitioned a bit from the UTPs to the CMO. Francesca Gonzalo, do you have any words on what you would like to see on the review? What do you make about the fight on mandatory written contracts?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, for me yeah, no, it works. Yeah, as I mentioned before, for me, UTP and CMOs are complementary, mainly because of the written contracts requirement. I just want to reply as well to Mrs. Santini quote, is that the fact if you want a farmer to be able to be remunerated, or the market, we have to give the farmers the instruments to do so. So now the market is unbalanced because of power imbalances. And the competition law doesn't address it because it's not market concentration, it's abuse of dominant position. Derived from the strong role of buyers. So we see UTP and CMO complementary because they add the tools for farmers to better negotiate their prices. So we see the ban on one side on the UTP on selling below production costs, together with written contracts, mandatory written contracts that will have the price of production in it, with a possibility to renegotiate as well. And as well as stronger roles of producer organization to let the farmers able to bargain better on the market. Concerning EGalim law, for example, one of the problems we see coming from narrative of farmers' organization is the fact that the cost of production, as it is defined in the law, is really broad. So when it comes up in negotiation, sometimes what is up at the end to be negotiated is the cost that is on the market. So it eventually doesn't arrive to protect farmers' income and revenues because this definition is too broad and the bargaining power is still too high. It depends on the sector. There are some sectors that benefited from EGalim and others that did not. And the experience is that where sectors were already used to written contracts and good negotiation terms, this was helpful. In other cases, it was not. So yeah, the problem for us is not the burden of regulation. We actually avoided regulating and moved to payment based on hectares. So the problem is how to put fair rules that will enable actors to actually be remunerated on the market.
Gonzalo?
Yes. Well, completely agree with my colleagues. I totally agree with what have been said regarding both tools, CMO and UTPs, are complementary. And actually, it was one of the main demands during the demonstrations that took place in the last years and months. So for us, I think this is very important, and I want to highlight that this was actually an historical demand for the sector. Having said that, written contracts for us specifically is crucial because, as it has been said, gives legal certainty to the farmer. We have doubts, or we don't understand why in this century we still don't want to have written contracts. I think it's on the safe of all of the parts. It gives transparency, it gives security, legal security. So for us, written contracts will be compulsory, and I think it's essential for advancing in the protection and the power of the farmer. And one other element that I want to introduce is the importance of the claims, of the importance of maintaining the anonymity of the farmer that puts in the diana who is doing bad practices. I think this is very important. We have to work more in protect the farmer because the structure of the market, they fear about being read with other measures after publication the contract. So it's very important also to work in the anonymity and guarantee the anonymity of the farmer. That's very important. And most importantly, the publication of the sanction to the public opinion, because even the economic amount of the sanction is not that much, the reputational damage for the one who is doing this badly is much more efficient than the sanction itself. So having those elements, possibility, let's say, canalized by farmer organizations to make on behalf of the farming to protect them and not be retaliated by the industry or whatever, and also the importance of having public publication of the sanction and of the name of the company who has made the sanction. So this is both important aspect that I wanted to remark.
I'm afraid we have to leave it here with this name and shame approach that you recommended. Thanks a lot to the speakers for these very interesting insights. And I leave you now to my colleague Alice for a debate on the Food and Feed Omnibus.
Thank you very much, Maria. So I'm Alice from the Agriculture and Food team at Euractiv, and we'll be now moderating the panel on the Food Safety Omnibus. And to discuss together, I'm very happy to welcome on stage Klaus Behrendt from the European Commission, Director on Food Safety, Sustainability and Innovation at DG Santé. Thank you very much. Please take a seat. With us as well will be Martin Dermine, Executive Director at Pesticide Action Network, Pan-Europe here in Brussels, and Alice O'Donovan, who is Secretary General of SELCA, which is the umbrella organization for agri-food trade associations in Europe. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining this discussion. Sorry. Maybe just a quick reminder, so we know what we're speaking about. The omnibus was presented in December by the Commission. It aims to reduce bureaucracy for farmers and for member states, facilitate the work of the Food Safety Authority, EFSA. And so among the proposition of the omnibus, there are some simplifying the approval process for pesticides, but also preventing that imports which contain residues of banned banned pesticides can enter the bloc anymore. Right now it's discussed at the technical level in the Council, and the Cyprus presidency wants to have a negotiating mandate by the end of their presidency, so it's moving forward. And in the Parliament it will be discussed by a joint Environment and Agriculture Committee. So now you know everything. And first, to start the conversation, I would like to ask you very simple questions so we can know a little bit more about where you stand on this omnibus. And first, for Mr. Klaus Behrendt. So it's not the first conversation we hear about the omnibus. It already has been a bit criticized on the impact it could have on food safety, but also on trade. So maybe could you remind us what's the thinking behind it and why the Commission believes it's necessary? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, what you call the omnibus, we actually refer to it as the package because it contains several separate proposals that together make a package. And for the first one, the one on the data protection periods for biocidal products, we already have a council position. So that's very good that we move fast on that one because it is indeed urgent, and the Parliament has also agreed to do an urgency procedure. Now to the one that you are actually referring to, one of the proposals in the package, very clearly resounding no, we are not, the Commission has not proposed in any way to lower the levels of protection, either for human health or the environment, even though, as you rightly said, that has been brought up in the discussion because of one element in the proposal that somehow seems to dominate the entire debate. I mean, all the rest is almost not talked about, and there are a number of regulations that are affected by our proposal with very targeted changes to, as you rightly say, reduce burdens without lowering the level of protection. And this is indeed the one element, and Martin will certainly comment on that, that we have proposed that it should be possible that approvals of active substances can become unlimited, and that we get out of this system that every active substance approval is limited in time and must be reviewed after a certain number of years, regardless of whether there is any particular reason to do so or not. And this has led to a situation that the vast majority of the resources of the member states are occupied by these renewal procedures, and they don't have a capacity to assess applications for new active substances, in particular also in the area of biocontrol, which is the area where we have most innovation and have had most of innovation for years. And to give you an example, there are 78 procedures for new active substances ongoing, but they are just not moving as they should because the member states don't have the resources to work on them. And we hear from many companies, in particular smaller ones also, that they have to wait for years before a member state is even accepting to become the rapporteur for their applications. So at the same time, all the renewal procedures are massively delayed, which is something that is also always criticized and requires the Commission to extend the approvals while the renewal procedures are still ongoing. So the current system is clearly not working as well as it should. And the choice was, do we continue with that or do we make a proposal to try to improve the situation? And that's what we have done. We have not proposed to change the approval criteria, so the strictness of the approval criteria remains the same, and hence the level of protection remains the same. We have proposed several safeguards, like maintaining the limited product authorizations, work programs that the Commission and the Member States must define to review approvals when there is a need to do so, when there are indications, for example, from new scientific evidence. And above all, and I think that's maybe the biggest game changer in this, we have proposed to define work programs for targeted reviews so that we do not look at the entirety of all issues for a substance, but can focus on certain elements, which will make it faster to generate the data for the applicants, and it will make it faster for the authorities to assess, and then we will also be able to take decisions faster. And the second aspect, and your question, I mean, is very large, the trade aspects, and I cannot say everything that I want to say in this few minutes.
Come back to it, don't worry.
The trade aspect, and this is again one of the elements in the proposal in the changes for the MRL regulation, where we have proposed that on a case-by-case basis there should be a possibility for the Commission to already establish this principle that was mentioned in the Vision for Agriculture and Food, that for the most hazardous substances banned in the EU, there should also not be any import tolerances anymore. And here I think it's important to understand that for the vast majority of these substances, MRLs are already lower to the level of detection or quantification, the technical zero. And it's only a very small group where EFSA has actually confirmed that the residues could be safe, even though the substance is not allowed in the EU anymore. And in the package we have proposed that we can already refuse such import tolerances on a case-by-case basis after an impact assessment if so warranted. And in the meantime, in parallel, the bigger impact assessment that is announced in the Vision for Agriculture and Food has started, or a study to support it has started by the Joint Research Center. To indeed do what the vision said, we want to assess the impacts of establishing this principle on competitiveness of EU agriculture and international implications. But that's still to come.
Thank you very much.
Our proposal is only very targeted, case by case.
That's very clear. It helps us really know what we're talking about. Ms. O'Donovan, how did you view this proposal? Very shortly, just so we know where you stand from the trade perspective that we just mentioned.
Introduce myself. I represent SELCA, which is the European Umbrella Organisation for the Agri-Food Trade Associations. So that will give you an indication of what angle I'm looking at this. I take on board, obviously the positive things like the streamlined procedure for approving substances, but ultimately for us, we're pro-trade, we're pro-science, and we're very concerned about some of the possible implications of what is being suggested. I think we live in an environment, particularly vis-a-vis the rest of the world, where optics are very important. And in that sense, while I accept what you say, that for most of these substances we already have the MRL of technical zero, I think potentially creating it as pitting ourselves against the world and the optics, again, I'm calling it optics, of imposing standards without there being a conversation or a consultation, we are staring down the gun of potential retaliation. It is a bearish world out there. It is looking at things very, very defensively, most markets. I think we need to remain open to the world with an eye to science. I think we need to have this dialogue open to all the players. I think, concerns can be addressed. I think everyone needs to have their view held on this, and I would agree that imposing this unilaterally is not really the way to go about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Before we dive a bit deeper on the trade issue and the MRLs, I think it's very interesting to step back a little bit on what you first mentioned on the substances. And it's true, it's not just about unlimited substances approval, it's also extending grace periods. It's also modifying a little bit mutual recognition rules between member states. Mr. Dermin, how did you see it from your perspective? And I believe you have a different view on how it could impact food safety.
Well, complementary view, I would say. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much to Euractiv for the invitation. I would say that, well, first introduce by saying that facts and science show that the current regulatory system in the EU is not sufficiently protective. People still get sick, the state of our biodiversity is still declining, especially in agricultural environments, which shows that we have to do better, not less well. Second, there are some positive aspects in the proposal to start with. The first one is to, as we just discussed, reduce maximum residue levels for imported food. This will help putting our farmers on a level playing field compared to farmers from other regions. Also better protect citizens through pesticide residues in their food. Second is to improve availability of biocontrol solutions, more greener alternatives to pesticides. This is positive, bringing the process more at EU level and with a fast-track procedure. Then I would say that one maybe more global remark on the negative aspects is that we feel at Pan-Europe that some provisions of the proposal from the Commission will make the pesticide regulatory process more political, less scientific, less automatic, let's say, and will give much more power to the Commission to make more arbitrary and political decisions, which is, in our view, not good. Pesticides is something that has to be scientific, its evaluation and the decision making. And now the Commission proposal is making it, in our view, less scientific and more political. I will just give two examples. One of the aspects of the proposal we don't speak so much about is the fact that the Commission proposes to allow to keep on the market endocrine disruptors or genotoxic pesticides for up to 5 years under a specific derogation regime for food production. But of course, these pesticides are used for food production. So what does for food production mean? This is something that is not defined at all in the proposal, and if it goes through, it will really allow for a lot of political arbitrary decisions that it will expose pregnant people, young children to endocrine disruptors, which in our view is really not acceptable. Another example is that the Commission proposal suggests that member states would not be obliged anymore to look at the latest scientific evidence on the pesticides when they do the national risk assessment, which again is not acceptable because member states could look at the science that is 20, 30 years old, even though there are dozens of new publications on pesticide toxicity every day if you look at the scientific literature.
Maybe can I ask for a reaction as well? Maybe we can continue. We'll continue on this topic. I saw you were a bit reacting on this. I think you were mentioning the extension of grace periods for certain specific products or substances rather, and you seem to believe that it's not the case. It's not going to lead to.
It was more the exception under Article 4.7 that Martin was commenting on, because today already there is an exception possibility for endocrine disruptors under Article 4.7 if they are essential for to combat a danger to plant health. That's already in the current regulation, so that we have not proposed a change there. The mention of plant production is indeed due to the fact that in one of the Agri-Fish Councils, I think in October or December last year, 13 or 15 ministers from the member states underlined the importance of food security and the possibility for farmers to produce, and that is why the Commission has picked up on that and has put it in the proposal. And longer grace periods for using up existing stocks are again motivated by the fact that we see that in the member states, and today it's important to understand there is not equal access to products in the EU market because the authorizations are by member state and mutual recognition doesn't work as it should. Some member states find themselves in a situation that if we do not renew the approval of an active substance, there are no alternatives available to the farmers immediately, and what they do then is they often use emergency authorizations, which Martin also criticizes. But we hope that by foreseeing longer grace periods for those member states where no alternatives are available, they will be able to complete procedures for alternatives so that they do not need to resort to emergency authorizations anymore. And before you take the floor, I forgot to congratulate Alice for Happy St. Patrick's Day, which should be said. So again, we believe that with our proposals, we try to put a bit more order in the house in that regard. What is today often solved with, for example, the emergency authorizations, which is not something that we want particularly either as the Commission.
And on the unlimited approval for certain substances, I have a question. You were mentioning many substances currently under approval, because there has been discussion on which one would be concerned, how many. Can we say will those active substances be concerned by the changes, or will they have to go through the normal procedure? And then maybe a second follow-up question. Isn't there a risk that it reduces incentives for research on the dangerosity and the risk of these substances?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen for quite a number of years that the vast majority of applications, or the majority, up to 2/3 of the applications for new active substances are indeed for what would fall under the biocontrol definition that we have proposed, and therefore they would benefit from the proposal that the member states must prioritize these assessments so that they get faster through the system. They could benefit from the provisional authorizations that the member states can grant while the approval procedure is still ongoing. And ultimately, I mean, for the ones that are submitted, of course, it's too late, but for the ones that where companies are waiting to find a rapporteur member state, EFSA could become the rapporteur member state. So yes, there would be immediate benefits for this innovation pipeline, and the target is really that we accelerate market access for these biocontrol substances so that we have a shift to a more sustainable plant protection product portfolio. Now, to respond to your question, is all of this not, or the unlimited approvals, are they actually not detrimental to innovation? Clearly, no. And the reason for that is A, there will always be a resistance development among pests, so there is a constant need for new active substances over time. Secondly, we see that most of the innovation today happens in this area of biocontrol, so that is immediately supported. And then thirdly, if you look at other countries in the world, and let's take as an example the US, where hardly any active substance has ever been banned. There is no review and renewal program happening comparable to ours, and yet all the new active substances and the companies and the applicants go to the US to get authorization in the US first, and long before they come to Europe or to Brazil for that matter, because the procedures are faster and they get the market access faster, despite the fact that all these old substances are still around there and available to the farmers. They all go to these markets first because they are faster. So we need to become more attractive for innovation, and the way to become more attractive for innovation is to accelerate processes and get faster market access for new innovative programs and products, and that is exactly what we have proposed.
Mr. Damin, I guess you want to react to this statement?
Yes, of course we value the fact that the Commission tries to fast track and give more resources to the approval of biocontrol substances. Nobody criticizes this, but on the other hand, with the current, Klaus is focusing a lot on biocontrol, which I understand, but on the other hand, with the current Commission proposal, the Commission will allow open-ended approvals for a lot of toxic substances. And the Commission is also reversing the burden of proof. Normally, active substances are reviewed every 10 to 15 years, and the industry has to provide an update of the available scientific knowledge. And now it won't be the case anymore, and it will be up to either NGOs, either universities, or volunteers to do the job instead of giving it to the industry. So there's really a big problem of food safety, and also it's a public concern in general, is that there won't be, Klaus mentioned revision programs and so on, but by experience at Pan-Europe, we know that when we send scientific publications to the Commission saying, look, there's this and this new publications showing toxicity, it does not automatically trigger revisions of these, of the approval of these substances and a revision of what's available in the scientific literature. So currently this approach doesn't work well, so I don't see why in the future there would be more will on looking at what's available in the scientific literature.
Ms. Odonovan, you work with producers as well for Agri-Food and Trade. I imagine that for you, increased productivity of farmers is interesting. So how do you see this measure regarding substance approval and fast tracking the process? Would you see that this would reduce burden for farmers with whom you work, and it might affect your work as well, or would you promote other measures?
People in the room who would have a more informed opinion on that than me, but I would say, and I'm going to bring it all back to trade again, if we're going to do it properly, let's raise all the boats in the world together. Let's bring everyone into the conversation. I think we have a once-in-a-generation chance to do something here, but I think we need to bring the rest of the world in. We don't shut out the rest of the world.
So maybe it's a good transition for the MRL measure that is part of the omnibus, of the package, as you say. So it proposes to restrict the number of products that can enter the block with residues of pesticides that are not allowed in here. And I've understood that it's more promoted as a tool for competitiveness of European farmers. But you mentioned it's also about food safety, so it's not only so it's also based on scientific evidence that it might be harmful for consumers. restricting the MRLs?
That is the principle of the current regulation. Whenever residues are not safe for European consumers, they are lowered to the level of detection or to a level that makes them safe. That is the current legislation.
But lowering them here would mean there is a risk for safety, or it's only for competitiveness and protection of EU farmers.
Maybe I wasn't clear, but right now MRLs are determined only by the safety assessment, and whenever EFSA finds that levels of residues in imported food or domestically produced food are not safe for European consumers, we lower the MRLs. That's the current rule.
Yeah.
What we have proposed in the package is to add a possibility that for the most hazardous substances banned in the EU, and I say it again, it's a small minority where EFSA has confirmed that residues are safe, that there is the possibility, or there should be the possibility, to also no longer grant them. And to give you an example, one is glufosinate. Glufosinate is not approved in the EU because the applicant withdrew the application in the course of the process. It's not because we actively banned it, but EFSA has confirmed earlier that the existing residue levels, the maximum residue levels, are safe for consumers, and that's why we left them in place. We have asked EFSA now to review that again in the light of new scientific information, so to come back to what Martin said. And they are looking at that right now, and then we will see when EFSA comes with its assessment whether the current MRLs are still safe or not. But they are in this category, and I hope, and to come back to what you said, Alice, that the study that the Joint Research Center is now doing will help to shed some light on how many substances are actually concerned by all of this. Because you're right, there is a lot of, how should I say, agitation in third countries about this proposal or about the principle announced in the vision. But our expectation, based on the monitoring programs that we have in place for monitoring residues in food, is that it will only be a handful of substances where there are actually significant imports of food commodities containing residues of these substances. For most of them that are not allowed in the EU, and where we still have MRLs in place, the numbers of times that residues are detected in imports is very low. It concerns even less than 1% or maximum a few percent of the samples, and we have about 130,000 samples taken every year for analyzing residues. There are only very few where the findings are higher, and to come back to my example, glufosinate, we have indeed a considerable share of soy and corn that are imported as feed for the livestock farmers in Europe that contain residues of glufosinate. But for practically all the others, there are extremely few findings of residues. So whilst you can of course take the principled position and say the EU should not do this, if you look at the actual facts, and I hope that the study that the Joint Research Center is doing will shed light on that, there are very, very few imports that are actually affected by all of this.
But can I have a follow-up question? Why then presenting this measure before the impact assessment? It's a question I hear quite often.
Because our stakeholders, and Alice of course has the perspective of either the importers or the third countries, but our European stakeholders, Martin being one of them, are impatient, and they want to see a complete ban of any residues of any substance not allowed in the EU. You are certainly aware that France and other member states have been advocating for this very vocally in recent years, but not only member states, also the European Parliament. If you might be familiar with the fact that whenever we want to set MRLs, we are in a regulatory procedure that requires the consent of the Parliament, or at least no objection by the Parliament. And what we have seen in recent years is that whenever we propose MRLs or import tolerances for active substances not approved in the EU, even if they are not in the most hazardous category, the Parliament systematically objects. So we cannot adopt these MRLs. That's already the situation today.
Okay, but so due to the impatience of actors, the Commission presents something they are not able to justify already. They will have to justify it through the impact assessment, saying if it's possible or if it's...
Yes,
okay.
But as said, already today the Parliament objects to any proposal from the Commission to set import tolerances for non-approved active substances.
All right. Ms. O'Donovan, would you like to extend a little bit on what you are going to say, you think it's going to be the impact on trade from these measures on MRLs and maybe on imports that we're not able to grow in Europe, or what do you think, or maybe you expect?
I think there's two layers to it, and the first one is very basic. I feel even silly saying it, but if you impose this technical zero on a certain substance, and presumably there's a product that cannot comply for, environmental or productive reasons, the production conditions that exist in a certain place in the world, you're essentially shutting the market out to the product. The second one is the scope for retaliation, which I already alluded to in my opening comments. And that's an unknown, that's an unquantified beast. And I think we live in a geopolitically very unstable world. I think our food security is dependent on building, constructive relations with the rest of the world. And I would be afraid of what the optics of this are doing and the message it's sending to the rest of the world.
Mr. Damin, you wanted to react?
Yes, for once, I would say I would agree with Herbert Dorfman, who was sitting here just before, saying that he's in favor of free trade, but with clear rules. And as Europeans, we have to be proud of our models and not be afraid of retaliation. In 2013, when the European Commission did the first restrictions on neonicotinoids, directly Canada, the US, Brazil, India were really putting a huge pressure on the Commission not to restrict. It was not even a ban, it was just taking regulatory decisions on really an important pesticide. And the Commission did it, and it didn't have consequences. And the same with many other pesticides that were banned. Every time the Commission wants to ban something, there are problems in Geneva, WTO. So we also need not to be afraid that third countries will adapt. They have the capacity to adapt, they are clever, they want access to the EU market, and they will adapt because they have always adapted up to now, and as Klaus said, it won't make a big change for them. They will just need to adapt a little bit more, and it will be good for our farmers and for the environment and public health in third countries. So I think we really need to be proud of the measures we take, lead by example, and as Alice, you were saying, uplift the level of the standards worldwide. Of course, we have to try to do it with the others, but if the others say, no, I want to keep being exposed to carcinogenic pesticides, okay, let's leave it this for non-EU blocks, but in the EU, we don't want to be exposed to genotoxic or carcinogenic pesticides.
We could say that some members of the WTO wouldn't agree because they raised concerns to the WTO just last week and before. So maybe Ms. O'Donovan, would you like to react to this statement? Is it also how you see things that other trade partners can adapt at home and then at the end it won't have any negative impact?
I mean, again, I don't know the ins and outs of the capacity of all our third country partners. I suspect you're absolutely correct. There are those that have adequate capacity and adequate means to bring themselves up to speed. I totally agree that we should be proud of the standard we're setting, but I think we need to do it. We need to discuss it on a level playing field, which is what the WTO offers. Now, I know the WTO system, it's not perfect, but ultimately we have to uphold the multilateral trading system. We have to go along with it, albeit, it's a slow process, I accept. And we need to remain open to the world. Don't shut out the rest of the world.
We are seeing that right now we have trade tensions with our usual partners, such as the US. Do you think from the Commission perspective that it's time to risk having further disputes with WTO partners on this issue?
I mean, first of all, nobody's helped with this black and white presentation, all or nothing, it happens rarely, but I agree with Martin also on the fact that where we believe that residues are not safe, they will not be set. And I've had many, many discussions with third countries. I remember my first, I became the head of unit of the pesticides unit in 2017, and on day number 3 I had a meeting with an ambassador from a third country that shall remain unnamed, who came to see me and said, if you lower that MRL to the level of the limit of quantification, you will prevent all imports of this and this crop into the EU, and 20,000 farmers in my country will die because they cannot sell their products anymore. We did lower the MRL because EFSA had confirmed that it wasn't safe. The imports of that crop continued from that country, and we see in general that despite all the complaints that we have in the WTO SPS committee regularly, trade figures go up. I mean, imports of agricultural commodities into the EU go up, and that clearly shows that the farmers in the third countries are able to adapt, and my colleagues from DG INPA are actually also helping them. INPA is financing a lot of programs in particular in African countries with organizations, with partner organizations, to help the local farmers to adapt to our rules and to find better alternatives. And that's something that we are indeed aware of. That's also part of our responsibility to support the farmers in the third countries and also the farmers in the EU to improve the portfolio of plant protection products that they use. And that's part of the process. But insisting on keeping using the same substances forever is clearly not a solution in the long term, also because of problems of resistance. There is change also in the third countries in which substances are being used.
Which touched on why the Commission and what impact could it have to change the rules on to restrict the MRLs in import. But now let's look at how it can be implemented. So the Commission says they want to increase the control in third countries and increase by a third the inspections at the border posts. Ms. O'Donovan, you are working in the trade sector. How feasible are those objectives according to you? How do you look at all of these efforts and these objectives to strengthen border control?
Well, I'm going to come out with a very simplistic answer again. It's money and it's willingness. And that, at the moment, I think, again, unquantifiable beast. But look, I'll believe it when I see it.
All right. I think we're arriving towards the end, and we'll have the lunch very soon next door. But before we conclude, do you want to share some last message that you want our public to come home with? What is the main message you want to defend here today? I don't know if you want to a last comment on maybe also the coming steps in the Council, the negotiation. Yeah.
No, I mean, as I said, I think there are some positive provisions in the Commission proposal, but also a lot of risky ones that will not solve the issues that have been identified. I think there are some evil forces that got into the proposal and that makes us think, oh, everything will be solved, but no, the problems are still there, and member states need to give more political priority to better risk assessing, faster raising fees for applicants, and hiring more staff. This is the problem. So I think we need to uplift the level of quality and expectation and not go with this race to the bottom with the negative aspects of the proposal. Thank you.
Mr. Klaus-Behrendt, from what we heard today.
I want to emphasize again that contrary to Martin's perception, there is absolutely no intention to lower safety standards. There is no reversal of the burden of proof, as you mentioned earlier, because it will still be for the applicants to bring the dossiers when the substances are selected for a full or a targeted renewal. We want to make the system overall more efficient, in particular for new biocontrol active substances, to get a shift towards a more sustainable plant protection product portfolio in the EU and have more solutions and better solutions available for our farmers.
Ms. O'Donovan.
Keep it pro-trade, keep it pro-science, don't shut the rest of the world out. Our security depends on it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We can give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. And we invite you to go next door for the lunch. Thank you.